Good morning, counsel.
The arrest.
Good morning, Mr. Loya.
Yeah.
Morning, Your Honor.
All right, with regard to the edited GoPro video, what do you say, Mr. Psychedelli?
It's reduced to a portion we can watch in court, so I don't have a position with that. I believe arguably it has evidentiary qualities.
You believe what?
I believe it's, it's obviously prejudicial because it's probative. So I don't have a position on it. I think it's authentic, and so I don't have a position on that. Again, suggesting that the court explain to them you're going to have
I
the
will.
full, because that's the doctrine of completeness and so on
I
and so
will.
forth.
I think that the edited version solves my concerns as to what can be effectively shown on this screen in the courtroom. To that extent, it has answered my concerns, and I appreciate that. I will explain to them that it is edited. I will explain to them that material has been removed, that they will have the original, as well as the edited version. So the edited version is going to be marked, if it comes off the GoPro, it's 125, is that correct?
Yeah.
So it would be 125, the next sub, which would be sub what?
It would be 125D.
Okay, now let's back up for a second. The GoPro itself is A. The stick is B.
Correct.
Is C the disc,
Yes.
and that had been edited as well
Yes,
and not shown to the jury?
right.
So we should remove that and make that an item for identification in case there's any appellate value to it.
I disagree.
Okay, well, how does it come in? If we're putting this in as the new edited version, how does the last edited version
But
come
we're
in?
not putting it in as necessarily the new, it's not replacing anything. The court indicated that if they wanted to watch the entirety of the video that we offered, they could do that. I should even mention that in my closing, I believe you said. And the only thing that was taken out of
Okay,
the,
but I thought that was a reference to the stick itself. In other words, they can watch the whole thing from start to finish. That's on the stick.
well, the stick.
What's on
The
C
stick can't
is-
be easily played. It's not something they can plug into the computer and play it. They had to download that onto a CD. We could put in the entire CD, but that part that was edited from that was just huge portions of blackness, where you don't see anything. You don't see lights moving, you don't see anything. It's just black.
Okay,
So,
let me explain it to them in that fashion. Fair enough, Mr. Segadelli? Let's do it that way.
okay, and just so the courts, I do need to have Trooper Donovan to testify simply because the date on there is in the European fashion. It says 5/2.
I'll explain that to them.
Okay,
It's obvious on the video.
right, that's the only thing that would be kind of, and you can also tell when it was edited, like this edited one, because the time is the same.
times jump.
Right, and it jumps and that shows up, that was an edit, then it jumps, oh, that was an
I'll
edit.
explain it to
Right.
We ready for the jurors?
Dr. Holdson's right outside, yes.
All right. Now, that's 125D.
Correct, thank you.
And when do you intend to play it, Mr. Glennie?
After Dr. Edersheim.
Thank you.
Edersheim. She'll be here, she can spell it for you.
Please be seated.
The call of general criminal matters will be heard in the second session. Second session, Mr. Caskey. Thank you. Good morning, jurors. Are there any among you who have anything to report to the court by way of your having gained information about this case or been exposed to information about this case after we parted company yesterday? Jurors have. We can continue with the doctor, please.
Dr. Holdson?
Please.
Sir, you remember you were under oath yesterday?
Yes, I do.
Remain under that oath today, please.
Okay.
Counsel? Counsel, when you're ready, please.
Thank you. I believe we left off, you'd indicated that you were discussing with Mr. Loya his version of the events. And I believe you had indicated something about the mattress. Could you just start from that point? Did he tell you something about the mattress?
Yes, he did.
What did he say?
At one point, Mr. Loya communicated to me that the mattress from the bed had come up to his face, and that he had pushed it back down away from him.
And then what did he say next, if anything?
He then stated that he pulled out a gun and began firing it into the mattress.
And what was his demeanor during that portion of the interview?
He was quite emotional.
And what did he say happened next?
He said that he heard Lisa gurgling, and then he left.
What did he say he did when he left?
After he left the home, he said that he was going to do battle with the law enforcement people, and he communicated to me that he went outside and waited for them. And at one point, he said he saw a silhouette. He heard some voices of people approaching, and then in the darkness, he saw a silhouette, and he said he fired at the silhouette. He didn't say how many times, I don't believe, he told me.
When he was speaking with you, did he indicate when you first went outside that there was an item outside that he did something with?
Well, he had a rifle. He said he had a rifle.
Did he mention a boombox?
Yes, he did.
Tell us about that.
He said he had a boombox and that he was playing music.
And you indicated that he saw silhouettes and he shot, is that correct?
Yes, he shot at one of the silhouettes, he said.
What did he do after that?
He said that he I think the word he used was retreated, and went to, he said he went to the porch of another home, I believe, and sat on the porch, and then he said he didn't hear anything, heard like the wind, but didn't hear any people, and then he got up from the porch, and he said he removed some article from him. I don't think it was a belt maybe, and then he put his rifle down and walked to a place where there was a light, like a lighted area, and he said he had his arms up, and he said, I guess I was surrendering, were the words he used to me.
Did he indicate what, if anything, happened next?
Yes. Mr. Loya said that the silhouettes approached him, and then he was told to, or he said I think he said he was kneeling at one point, and he said he was placed under arrest, and he said that the whole time that the law enforcement people were approaching him while he was there, again, it wasn't clear to me whether he was standing or kneeling at that point, but at the point where he had his arms up, he said that whole time he was hoping that he would be shot by the police. And he said he was handcuffed, and that there was a dog, a police dog, that was there as well.
And did he say that he had said something to them about the dog?
Yes, he said, not the dog, not the dog.
Did he indicate he had some conversation with the people that were approaching him? Other than the not the dog?
Yes.
What did he say he told them?
So Mr. Loya communicated to me that someone there had asked him what happened, I believe is what Mr. Loya told me, it was the question. And he responded by saying that he was raped. He said, I was raped, like repeatedly, or she raped me repeatedly, one of those two phrases.
And did you ask him about what his mission was that he decided on in Virginia?
I did, yes.
What did he say about that, if anything?
Well, he said there were two components to it. One, that he was going to come to Massachusetts to kill Lisa for, as he put it, what she did to him. And I believe he said something to the effect of she ruined my mind or she ruined my life or both of those things. And that the second part of his mission, that he was going to engage in law enforcement in a gun battle so that he would be killed because he said he was suicidal.
Did you ask him where he was now with what he had done?
I did. I asked him about where he was with the event.
And what did he say, if anything?
Mr. Loya initially said that he continued, at that point in late late July of 2015, he said that he still hated Lisa. And then I asked him a second time where he felt he was with the event, and he said he couldn't believe that it happened. And he couldn't believe that he's still alive.
And did he indicate what his feelings were towards Lisa at that time?
Yes, he said at that point that I hate her, or something to those words.
And were you able to form a clinical opinion regarding his criminal responsibility?
Yes.
And that was based upon your interviews and the materials that you had reviewed?
Yes.
Could you tell us about the process to forming that opinion, please?
Well, the process was interviewing Mr. Loya under the Lamb warning and also reviewing the records that were made available to me, which included the several documents by Detective Noble, I believe his name was, and including a narrative of the offenses.
And were you, I'm sorry.
And then asking, trying to determine Mr. Loya's mental state at that time and also shortly before the time of February 5th.
And when you conducted your interview, that would have been on, formed your opinion and wrote your report. That would have been on August 5th of 2015?
Yes.
Did you have an opinion as to whether Mr. Loya was currently, at that time, suffering from a mental illness?
Yes, I opined, as I had earlier, that he suffers from a major depressive disorder.
And did you then opine as to whether or not he was suffering from a mental disorder at the time of the crime?
Yes.
And what was that?
It was my opinion that Mr. Loya was not suffering from a mental disorder at the time of the offenses.
And with respect to his ability, well, his criminal responsibility, tell us about what your opinions are on that and what you base that upon.
Well, first of all, Mr. Loya was someone, despite his saying that he was suicidal every day for a long period of time, I believe it was October 2013, he was someone who was not engaged in any mental health treatment in the months before February 5th, 2015. He was somebody who was gainfully employed. He was someone, in other words, he was someone who was functioning in society as a non-mentally impaired person, substantially impaired person. And so it was. That was a core reason why I thought that he did not suffer from a mental illness as it's defined by statute law.
And what about your opinion concerning whether Mr. Loya was able to both appreciate and comport his behavior to the requirements of law?
Yeah. So with respect to those two components, Mr. Loya described to me that he planned out this act for quite some time and took some steps indicating that he was going to make this act happen. As I testified yesterday, he donated some items to an organization before he left Virginia. He paid his bills. He did all of those things in a rational, responsible manner, showing that to me that he was somebody who could make proper decisions.
And based on the available information, what was your opinion concerning Mr. Loya's criminal responsibility?
That he was criminally responsible for the crimes committed on February 5th.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all I have. Oh, I'm sorry, one other thing just before. Did you write a report concerning this incident?
On Mr. Loya?
Yes.
No, the last reports that I wrote for Mr. Loya would have been in July, early August, based on my late July reports.
I'd ask you to look at that, tell me what that is.
It's my criminal responsibility evaluation dated August 5th, 2015.
No, I don't think so.
By agreement.
Next number exhibit, please.
On 136.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination if you wish, counsel.
Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
You're a forensic psychologist, correct?
Yes.
Do you abide by the specialty guidelines for forensic psychologists?
Yes.
On page 2 of your report, you outline all the sources of information forming the basis of your opinion, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree there's an enormous amount of additional data in this case besides what you cited?
I understand that there is additional information that was not made available to me at the time that the evaluation was ordered.
Okay. Isn't it true that those specialty guidelines require you to, quote, to seek to maintain integrity by examining the issue or problem at hand from all reasonable perspectives and seek information that will differentiate, test plausible rival hypotheses? Page 15 of that specialty guidelines.
Yes.
Now tell the jury then exactly what you did to seek the information and any of the additional information available in this case that might have tested rival hypotheses to your conclusions.
Okay. So one of the things that I had done and other members at the hospital had done.
Let's talk about what you did.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I did with Mr. Loya is I had asked him on a couple of occasions if he would allow me to speak with people who would have known him well in the U.S. Coast Guard, his commanding officer at the time and his in Virginia, as well as his former commanding officer at that time, so that I would be able to get some additional information from them about his functioning in the Coast Guard and maybe any mental problems he may have had in the Coast Guard. So did that. In addition, I consulted with Mr. Loya's treatment team at Bridgewater State Hospital, and I on a couple of occasions, and I understand that Mr. Loya had repeatedly told his treatment team that he was not going to permit anyone at the hospital to speak with members of his family, that he was not going to allow anyone at the hospital to have any contact or release records, if there were any records, from the person with whom he was in treatment with, short-term treatment with in Kodiak, Alaska. And that, too, I thought would have been very important information. Somebody who's in outpatient mental health treatment be really important for me to know what that clinician had to say about that individual.
Know that clinician's name.
Her name was, she was given two different names and two different professions in the record, so I don't know her exact name. I understand that someone at Bridgewater State Hospital had told, someone from Mr. Loya's treatment team had told me that she was a social worker. Somebody else had written down that she was a psychiatrist, but at any event, she was someone with whom Mr. Loya was not allowing anyone at Bridgewater State Hospital to contact.
I don't want to interrupt you now. Are you saying that Mr. Loya signed or refused to sign some release?
Yes.
Do you have that document?
I don't have that document. It would be in.
Document?
It would be in his medical record, or would be documented in his medical record.
Okay, so perhaps if we have a break, you'll be able to find that.
If his medical record's available, I'll surely look for it.
And it was something he told the treatment team that he wasn't going to help. You said that was one of the causes, right?
Yes.
You talked to the defendant, right?
I did talk to Mr. Loya, yes.
Okay, and he said he wasn't going to give you his commanding officer's name, right?
He was not going to give me any contact information of either his current or his past commanding officers.
He said, not that he was refusing, but he said that he'd retired from the Coast Guard, so that wasn't necessary.
Well, that was his reasoning for refusing.
Okay, and so again, now going to your page 2, do you have you probably know it from your head, and in speaking with Loya, how many times did you speak with him?
For the purposes of the criminal responsibility, I spoke with him on July 27th and again on July 28th.
Yep, and on the 27th, sir, you spent 130 minutes, a little more than 2 hours, fair?
Yes,
And on the 28th, you spent 85 minutes, fair?
yes.
So 3.5 hours. That's fair, right?
To cover the, as I recall, the July 27th interview was largely information to conduct a competence to stand trial evaluation, which of course includes some information that would be pertinent to his criminal responsibility evaluation. But on July 28th, that was the date that Mr. Loya provided me with his account of his mental state and his behavior around the time of the offenses.
So the 3.5 hours I give you, a significant portion of that should be subtracted because you utilize that for your competency evaluation. I want to focus you to criminal responsibility.
Yes.
Okay? So it's something less than 3 hours you spent with them as it relates to criminal responsibility. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. Now, you indicate another source of information, your review of an order of examination from the court. Well, that's just a piece of paper, isn't it?
Yeah.
That didn't take any time to give you any information,
Nope,
did it?
it just let me know that the court indeed had ordered the 2 evaluations, which is important to know before you proceed.
Your number 3, sir, another review of an order of commitment. Again, another piece of paper from the court saying that's why the body's here.
Yes.
Okay. A Bourne Police Department arrest report from Detective Noble. Does Noble work, a fellow named Noble work for Bourne Police Department?
That would have been what I wrote in my report.
Okay.
I have not met him, so I don't know.
But that would have been the name you took off a report, it's a fellow named Noble?
I think it was a Detective John Noble.
Okay. And a review of Bourne Police Department narrative of, again, this, whoever this Noble is, and it's, did that, just the report of the scene of the crime?
It was a description of the event.
Okay. And then you reviewed a document, I believe it's that common document we call Miranda sheet. So Bourne Police, with whoever that detective was, had what's called a Miranda sheet. So you had that as a source
Yes.
of your information. And lo and behold, a fellow named Lawyer's name's on it.
Yes.
Okay. You, of course, you worked at Bridgewater, and you've worked at Bridgewater since 1999, working for the state to present, true?
Yes.
So you had access to those records, true?
Which record specifically?
Well, you indicate, again, you're number 7, Bridgewater State Hospital medical records, including what you authored in March and what you authored on a different day in March. You had access to those, correct?
Yeah, and the progress notes that his treatment team wrote, yes.
And then last thing you said, review of Mr. Loya's Massachusetts criminal record.
Yes.
There was no criminal record but for these allegations in this case, right?
Right, so there was an arraignment that would have been put on his quarry.
Okay, but again, other than these charges which brought him to you, there was no criminal record, right?
Well, the charges, yeah, so, correct.
Well,
All right,
again,
let's just take a little lingo break here for a minute, okay? Jurors, a CORI is a criminal offender record information form. It's someone's record of court appearances. Criminal responsibility is one of the core issues in this trial relative to whether the Commonwealth can prove that Mr. Loya was legally sane at the time of the allegations. That focuses on February 5th, 2015. Criminal competency is a different concept. It focuses on whether an individual has the ability, the mental health competency to be tried in a courtroom. That refers to the status of the individual during various court appearance dates, not February 5th, 2015. Any other definitions that we should provide at this point for the
Not for the
jury?
defendant. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
Sir,
Oh,
just-
one more, Mr. Segadelli. There's been repeated references to lamb warning. Every mental health professional who is going to discuss the facts of surrounding criminal allegations is obligated to give the person being examined a warning. It's called a Lamb warning because it comes from the case of Commonwealth versus Lamb, a decision by our state Supreme Court. And it's, in a sense, a little bit like a so-called Miranda warning relative to the subject's rights to speak or not speak with the examiner. That's the Lamb warning. Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, just to step back, Doctor, you indicated, you spoke to Mr. Loya, and he wasn't immediately forthcoming with information about commanding officers and so forth. Again, I asked you about what you did to gather other information. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. You said he wasn't immediately forthcoming with the name of his commanding officer, true?
Yes, well, all contact information, including...
Oh, everything?
Yeah.
Okay. And he also, with the treatment team, you said he wasn't immediately...
He stated that he was not going to allow anyone at the hospital to be able to speak with members of his family.
Okay. Well, did you reach out to the district attorney's office ever and ask for supplement the info that you had?
What information specifically?
Well, I mean, you talked about some fellow named Noble, you got his police report, there surely was other police reports as it relates to a capital case, right?
There might be, I wouldn't know.
And other than whether or not Mr. Loya was going to give it to you, again, you've reached out before to district attorney's office to seek other information.
From, at times I have, yes.
Okay, did you do in this case?
No.
Did you seek out any information from the Coast Guard?
No.
Were you aware the Coast Guard did a thorough and extensive investigation?
I would not have known that.
Okay. Were you aware that Mr. Loya, or did you become aware that Mr. Loya prepared what some call a manifesto or perhaps a diary of this event in written form on USBs that he had on his body?
I know that Mr. Loya told me that he wrote a memoir/suicide note, but he didn't indicate that it was anything of length. And I wouldn't think that he would have still had that to provide to me.
Okay, so you didn't learn of, in fact, the USB that he had around his neck?
Nope, I did not know that.
It wasn't contained anywhere in this Noble report?
No, not that I recall, it was not.
Okay, so I show you what's marked in Exhibit 128. Just take a look for yourself, just perhaps the front and/or peruse the document. Have you ever seen that?
No, I have not.
And again, the only thing you think you knew about that is that could be a, quote, suicide note.
Yes.
Okay. So, again, the suicide note's all you know, you didn't know about. Again, I'm using the word manifesto, some could say a diary of 2 years immediately prior, and stopping 4 days before the actual incident. You don't know anything about that.
No, not at all.
You did, though, hear about something about a page 7 or a disciplinary note showing witness what's been marked Exhibit 74. You heard about that document?
No, this is the first time seeing of this. I don't know.
Did you ever seek out that information?
No.
Did you hear about when the police from Chesapeake went into his apartment, and in fact, that was the only document sitting on a desk?
I did not know that.
Okay. Did you, in your speaking with Mr. Loya, were you ever made aware of a letter, in fact, a 22 or 23-page single-spaced letter he wrote to this woman, Lisa?
No, I was not aware of that.
Okay, so I just show you what's been marked as exhibit number 129. So not only were you not made aware of it, you've never had the opportunity to read that and or to take that into consideration.
No, I've never seen this before.
Another document, respectfully, Doctor, entitled what I believe to be authored by Mr. Loya about bits about girls or women, bits about that, another handwritten by him narrative.
No, I've not seen those.
You didn't reach out to the district attorney, did you reach out to any police officer?
I'm sure it's just a misstatement, but that's not handwritten.
Oh, no, typed.
You'll have a chance to redirect.
You did not reach out to the district attorney, we agreed with that, right?
Yes, correct.
You did not reach out to the Coast Guard Fair?
I would have reached out to his commanding officers to learn of his mental state, but I would not have known that there was an investigation, so I would not have surmised to think to contact someone in the Coast Guard to see if there was some information I could get about him without Mr. Loya's permission.
See if I can put that together, what you just said. You did not surmise that there was a Coast Guard investigation?
I would not have, yeah, I would not have known if there would have been an investigation about Mr. Loya. I would not have known that there would have been one.
And you didn't reach out to the district attorney's office and or the police to see if there was one?
No.
And just because Mr. Loya would not tell you who his commanding officer was, there was no other source of information where you could have gone out to find out who his commanding officer was?
Well, that's correct. That's right.
And he told you, for instance, he sought this clinician, and the woman's name up in Kodiak, right? You gave him a name, there was some conflicting data, true?
Yes.
Did you do any independent investigation and or research about that woman in Kodiak?
No, because I knew I was not able to contact her.
When you say you weren't able to contact, oh, because of this note you're gonna find that he said you can't talk to her,
That's right.
okay? Your only information then, because he told you about him having been, he first told you about sexually assaulted, true?
Yes.
And then he later, again, because you go over facts again with the individual.
Yes.
To verify or if it corroborates, self-corroborating, right?
Well, just to get his account of what happened.
And he told you on another instance that sexual assault, he termed it rape, didn't he?
Yes.
And did you ask him about having been raped?
As I had testified yesterday, he described an incident of a time when he was invited over to Lisa's home by her under the pretext of watching a film. And after watching a film or watching television for a period of time, he indicated that she started to make gestures and make remarks stating that she wanted to have sex with him. And he didn't say anything more about that. Seemed like he didn't want to say anything more about that other than to say it was upsetting to him, that it made life at work afterwards with her quite uncomfortable for him because she had never done or said anything like that before, and that he worked in close proximity to Lisa. It was only then later that he told me or referred to that incident as a rape.
Significant trauma, at least in his life. You interpreted that, didn't you, from his words?
From his words, yes.
And you didn't ask him further to explain how he was raped by this woman?
I did not, no.
Now, how many homicides, Doctor, have you testified in?
Oh, I don't keep track.
Oh, can you give us your best estimate?
I really don't know. I know that I've conducted over 1,000 reports for the court, and I wouldn't know how many of those are criminal responsibility evaluations. off the top of my head either. I'd say probably about 100 or so.
How many, so probably about 100 that you testified to?
Approximately, let's say just a guess.
Okay. Now, how many people have you diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome?
I don't keep a tally of diagnoses and the frequencies of diagnoses, but certainly there are people at Bridgewater State Hospital who treatment teams and myself have felt that somebody has been on the autism spectrum, on the high functioning end of the autism spectrum disorder, and those people are referred to commonly as having Asperger's syndrome.
Just talk about you, doctor.
Yeah.
Diagnosed,
Yep.
or let's say treated someone with Asperger's. Have you ever either treated or diagnosed somebody with Asperger's?
I've not treated anybody at Bridgewater for years and years, so no one.
Have you ever diagnosed anybody with Asperger's? It's not something that's common, is it?
It's not that common. I can't recall. Again, I don't keep track of diagnoses that I give to people. I don't keep like a database of how many people I've seen who have this diagnosis versus that diagnosis. I would say that at least one person, but certainly not like, it's not a diagnosis that's quite common at Bridgewater.
Because it's unique, it's something wrong with the number. That's fair, isn't it?
It would be fair. Again, I don't recall the number of people that,
Call that at least one.
there's been at least one person. I know I've consulted on other cases at the hospital in my role there with treatment teams who have felt that they've had patients who may have it.
We talked, and the judge gave a description about a lamb warning, and that's the warning, or the speech you give to the patient before you sit down with them. It's about confidentiality and the like, before you sit and do your evaluation with them. Is that fair?
It's not total, but that's not incorrect.
And how, when you're doing these evaluations, doctor, how important is it to meet the patient that you're evaluating?
When I can, it's critical that I meet the patient, and it's critical that I speak to them if they allow that.
When you say it, okay, it's critical, can you give an opinion if you have not?
Yes.
spoke?
Oh, yes. I have. Yes, I have given opinions to courts about patients at Bridgewater who have refused to meet with me.
Okay, if there's not a refusal and one doesn't get, let's say if we were to ask you about Donald Trump, is it appropriate for you to give an evaluation pursuant to the guidelines and ethics of your profession?
Of a public figure?
Yeah, or anybody? Yeah.
I think it would not be appropriate to give a diagnosis of someone that in the public eye that you've not met or have no collateral contacts that would inform you of that person's mental state.
Something about that Goldwater rule, have you ever heard of that?
Some years ago, I have.
Okay, what does that tell us?
That, as I recall, but it's been many, many years, that mental health professionals really must be guided when giving diagnoses of mental disorder. They really must be guided by their profession and not speak basically about public figures' mental state when they have not done evaluations of those people.
Starting on page 7, Doctor, you outline the course and hospitalization of Mr. Loya at Bridgewater State Hospital, do you not?
Yes.
Now, Doctor, I'll show you a document from Bridgewater State entitled Physician's Order, signed by Dr. Angelis, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Angelis?
Angelis, on February 10th, 2015. And what does that document, please, reflect, if you would? What does that reflect about Dr. A's provisional diagnosis of Mr. Loya when he was admitted to Bridgewater State Hospital?
So Dr. Angelis provided a provisional diagnosis that says rule out psychosis not, it says NOS, but that stands for not otherwise specified. And so that would be an unspecified psychiatric disorder that is psychotic in nature.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. The first, to explain to the jury, the R/O psychosis and NOS means, again,
So the R/O stands for rule out, which means there is no diagnosis. There is a hypothesis that the person may have whatever follows the R/O. And in this case, Dr. Angeles wrote R/O psychosis NOS.
so may have psychosis.
Yes, that's something. It's something to rule out.
Now, did you include that? I'd like to enter that as exhibit. We're going to do all of the records.
Offered.
Can we just approach this?
Surely. Witness, please.
Morning again, Doctor.
Good morning.
Again, I show you that, Dr. Angeles,
Angeles.
and I asked you RO, just so I'm clear. Angelis's opinion, she's not ruling out being psychotic, right? Just not ready to say psychotic.
Yeah, that it's a something that should be further looked into.
I'd like to enter that as exhibit, respectfully, Your Honor.
No objection.
Next number exhibit.
137.
Doctor, you did not include that information or diagnosis by Dr. Angelis in your section about the course of Mr. Loya's hospitalization, did you?
Yes, because it's not a diagnosis.
You didn't admit that diagnosis because it wasn't keeping with your own position?
No, because a rule out is not a diagnosis. It's, I think this might be something that this person has
You keep an eye on, right?
to look at, yes.
You keep an eye on, but you didn't put that in your,
No, I believe I discussed whether or not Mr. Loya has had a psychosis at other points in my report.
and that omission isn't an ethical violation?
No.
Now, showing you now. Progress notes, please, Doctor. You have the opportunity to look at those from a social worker named Lindsay Wass, dated February 12 of 15.
Yes.
That would be what, 2 days after Dr. Angelis' provisional diagnosis that we just discussed, right?
Yes.
Do you agree with me in looking at that? Ms. Wass states in part in her progress note that Mr. Loya appeared to be, quote, quite honest and forthcoming with information, including his history of panic attacks, one of which occurred while he was driving such that he could not feel his arms or his hands, right?
Yes, she did write that.
Okay. Did you include that information from Wass in your section about the course of Mr. Loya's hospitalization?
Not that specific information.
Okay. Would you have a problem with entering that?
Yes.
Why?
Why? Because you've got highlights on.
Subject to our redacting a portion of this, I'm going to move to introduce it, so perhaps as ID, so we can remove some of my marking. Oh, had you read this when you did your diagnosis?
Yes.
Again, under the...
You've got some notes of your own on
No,
there?
just actually a highlight.
A highlight.
Yeah, there's notes on the second page.
All right, so we're going to,
A highlight and one underline.
okay, so we're going to substitute a clean copy.
That's fair, Your Honor.
So for the moment, your marked up copy is going to be, the last exhibit was part of the Bridgewater reports, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
This is part of the Bridgewater reports, correct? Last exhibit now becomes last number A. This will be same number B, so that we keep the Bridgewater reports in one sequence of exhibits.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right,
Now, Doctor, to be clear, again, her
Let's-
quote,
let's let the clerk do his job.
So, all right, so Do you have 137, Brian? Yeah, I just want to change that. So 137 is now 137A. And progress notes is 137B.
Thank you.
So Mark.
With the understanding that that will be just
You're
clean.
going to be substitute. We all took care of that. Okay.
Again, just to be clear, Ms. Voss indicates, Mr. Loya, you're, quote, quite honest and forthcoming with information, correct?
Yes.
Again, Doctor, you didn't include that in information from Ms. Voss in your section about the course of Loya's hospitalization, did you?
That's correct.
In your field, again, Dr. Forensic Psychology, would that admission be considered an ethical violation?
No, it would not.
Well, it doesn't. Well, doesn't that in fact conflict with your conclusion on page 19, sir, that Mr. Loya told the treatment team something different from what he told you, implying that he lacked honesty and being forthright?
No, because he said something different doesn't mean that he was being consciously deceitful.
Okay, well, again, I don't want to argue the semantics, but she, again, quite honest and forthcoming, and you indicate he wasn't forthcoming with his history, his parents' name, his commander's name, and all of that.
Well, he was stating, no, I don't want the hospital to be having contact with any of those individuals.
Now, I am turning, and if you need perhaps to refresh your recollection of your page 10, Doctor, your report, you're discussing how Mr. Loya told a Bridgewater staff member named Miss O'Brien that he did not want to take Risperidol because it didn't feel like the right time to start feeling better, correct?
Yes.
You remember that quote, and you know
I
it's a Miss
do.
O'Brien?
I do, yes.
Now, am I saying it right, Risperidol?
Risperidol.
That's a psychiatric medication, correct?
It is.
And what class of medication is Risperidol?
It's an antipsychotic medication.
And it's used to treat patients with psychosis, right?
Yes, it's an antipsychotic medication.
So it's fair for us to assume that a doctor at Bridgewater State Hospital must have prescribed an antipsychotic medication, Risperidol, to Mr. Loya.
So,
No, overruled.
so Monica O'Brien, or known as Ms. O'Brien, she's not a doctor, she is a prescribing nurse practitioner, so she certainly has the background to be able to prescribe medications for her patients, and indeed she had prescribed Risperidol, an antipsychotic medication for Mr. Loya.
She's again appropriately qualified to do so, right?
That's correct.
That's an antipsychotic drug.
Yes, that's correct.
So she's not a doctor, but she's surely qualified to give such medication. She arrived at a different conclusion about Mr. Loya than you did.
She concluded that at that point in time, it would be worth having Mr. Loya try Risperidol.
Okay, and he did so for some time, right?
I don't know for how long a period of time. I think when I spoke with Ms. O'Brien, and my recollection of the progress notes, he took it for a short period of time, but I don't know for how long.
Okay, and you don't know how his resulting behavior?
I understand that he reported that he was feeling better, and he reported he did not like feeling better, so he stopped taking that medication.
Now, your page 19, doctor, was it you who gave him, you're a psychologist, right?
Yes.
So you can do, unlike psychiatrists, you do the testing. Is that
Yes.
accurate? And you did testing on Mr. Loya, true?
Yes.
And your testing result indicating the possibility of diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, true?
No, that's false.
Page 19. When did you do those testing?
I would have done the testing in late February of 2015 when Mr. Loya was first admitted to Bridgewater State Hospital.
Okay, and And again, perhaps to refresh your recollection, he's inconsistent with diagnosis of major depressive disorder, although in addition to his diagnosis, his personality testing results also indicate that he could also, A, suffer from a more chronic type of dysphoria called dysthymia.
Dysthymia? Yes.
And or have borderline personality traits.
Traits, which is quite different from borderline personality disorder, which is the question you had asked me minutes ago.
But it's suggestive of overvaluing or devaluing others, right?
Yes.
Difficulty sustaining the few relationships he has, true?
True.
Unstable sense of himself, such as having chronic waxing and waning sense of worthlessness, true?
Yes.
And it could include periodic suicidal ideations.
Including chronic suicidal ideations, depending on his where he was in his head in from moment to moment about his sense of worth.
It's also, the testing is indicative of personality disorder traits, true?
Traits, not disorder, traits.
Now, can you just tell us the basic features, other than the ones I just named, of borderline personality disorder?
Well, Mr. Loya, in my opinion, does not suffer from borderline personality disorder. The testing that I conducted on him indicated, as you just read from my report, the possibility that he might have some traits of it,
So,
but not that the testing did not indicate that he had borderline personality disorder.
so we have possibility of borderline personality disorder. We
Traits.
Also, traits.
Borderline traits.
And but we also have at that time, according to his admission doctor, the possibility of psychosis, or psychotic, right?
Yes.
I mean, this isn't, what you do isn't an exact science, right, doctor?
We try our best, but it's not a thermometer in water.
And in fact, that book we use, or we bandy about DSM-5, you utilize that, right?
Yes.
And those are merely what the book gives is labels, right?
Yes.
I mean, this isn't cookie cutter, it's not exact for people that you
It
designate true.
tries to be exact as we know with our current state of knowledge.
Right, and in fact, it gives cautionary instructions about, it's for the clinician, true?
Yes, and it changes over time as well.
And it's more important for you to be looking at symptoms rather than labels, is that fair?
It's important to understand patients as best we can understand them, and in communicating with other people, it's quite important to use common language. So I don't want to be disparaging of diagnostic labels because those labels actually do help mental health professionals communicate with other mental health professionals what we're talking about, that we're on the same page, we're talking about the same clusters of symptoms or the same experiences that patients have. It's also important, too, that when people read about disorders in textbooks or lay books or even on the internet, it's important that when those labels are being used by mental health professionals, that they're using those in accordance with the current definition in DSM. So it's basically helps form a consistent language to describe someone.
Label,
Yeah,
using labels to help you fellows out, right?
yeah.
Now, borderline personality disorder, just to get onto another it is a mental illness, right?
It's a personality disorder. It's a
Now-
psychiatric disorder.
Have you had the opportunity to review Dr. Idesheim's report in this case?
Dr. Idesheim, no.
Okay. Now, as a forensic psychologist, you know the legal standard for lack of criminal responsibility, sir?
Yes.
Under McCowell?
Yes.
Now, would you tell the jury what that is?
So, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a defendant is not to be held criminally responsible when, at the time of the offenses, that person suffered from mental illness or mental defect that would either have them be unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of those acts or be unable to comport their behavior.
Now, have you had the opportunity, sir, to review, well, do you know Dr. Martin Kelly?
No.
Ever heard of him?
I've heard of him, but I haven't spoken with him.
You have the opportunity to review Dr. Martin Kelly's evaluation and his opinions as a result to Mr. Loya.
No.
Did you ever seek out try to obtain that evaluation?
I didn't know any doctor, I didn't know that Dr. Kelly or any other doctor that you had mentioned was involved in the case.
Okay, well, I'll bring up a Dr. John Daniel. Have you ever heard that name before?
Yes, I did read that in, it was a court clinician's report.
Okay, so you just know the name.
Yes.
You read his evaluation.
No, I did not.
Okay, so you don't know that he spent some over 40 hours with Mr. Loya, true?
Don't know that.
You spent under 3 hours with him, right?
That's correct.
Did you rule out a potential for a delusional disorder, Mr. Loya?
Yes.
Am I correct, though, in suggesting that a person with a delusional disorder does not present obvious, bizarre, or odd behavior?
Many times that's quite true.
Isn't it true that a common characteristic of an individual with delusional disorder is apparent normality?
That's, unless you are tapping into that area where they are delusional, they can appear quite unimpaired, yes.
Quite normal, right?
Yes.
And according to DSM-5, violent behavior can occur with somebody with a delusional disorder. Isn't that fair?
Fair to say yes.
In your conclusion or others, you indicate that your opinion is derived by all of your information. You're speaking with the patient, and then all of the information you have at your disposal you don't have, true?
Yes.
So it is subject to change, assuming it's supplemented with appropriate information.
Of course, if I had other documents to review, my opinion might change.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Just briefly. So if you look at exhibit number 136, that's your criminal responsibility report, correct?
Yes.
What's the date of that?
August 5th, 2015?
August 5th of 2015.
Yes.
Exhibit 135, does that have a date on it?
November 19th, 2016, and that is written, letterhead is Martin J. Kelly, MD.
That would be after you had written your report, right?
Yes.
And would you be kind enough to look at this item? Can you tell me what the date on that item is?
January 14th, 2016.
What's the letterhead of that?
The letterhead is Dr. John Dano, I believe.
After you written your report, right?
Correct.
Now, with respect to exhibit number 137A, if you be kind enough, you remember what that is?
Yes, that's the physician admission order page that was authored by Dr. Angeles on 21015.
And it indicates rule out, correct?
Yes.
And you described what that term means, right?
Yes.
And you did rule it out, didn't you, in forming your opinion?
Yes.
You had been, I'm sorry, you were asked about, I'm going to mispronounce, but dysrhythmia?
Dysthymia?
What is that?
So, dysthymia is a psychiatric disorder that used to be called depressive personality disorder many decades ago, and it got changed to the name dysthymia. It's also known as persistent depressive disorder. So the best way to describe dysthymia is a person who does not meet criteria for major depression as a matter of course, although somebody with dysthymia certainly could have a major depression from time to time, and that's considered having a double depression. That's known in the literature as having a double depression, where they would be at that moment having both dysthymia and a major depression. But dysthymia is a chronic depressive state. These are the people that one might encounter who are very low in their mood. They look like they're down and depressed all the time. They don't. The themes of their speech, what they talk about, is quite negative, and yet they function. They're the person in your neighborhood or at work that always seems to be negative and down and doesn't look happy, but they show up for work every day and they do adequate job.
And you considered that in this case, did you not?
Yes.
And what was your opinion concerning Mr. Loya's either suffering from that or not?
Well, I thought that there's a possibility that he might have that.
And that doesn't affect your opinion concerning his criminal responsibility, does it?
No.
And with respect to the delusional disorder, you considered that in forming your opinion, did you not?
Yes.
And it doesn't affect your opinion concerning his criminal responsibility, does it?
No.
And who's paying you to be here today?
I'm not paid to be here. Well, it's part of my job, working at Bridgewater State Hospital, to testify in court-ordered evaluations that I conduct.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Well, if you can't tell us, doctor, if you had his 265-page diary that covers perhaps 4 years or so, all the other information I gave you, of which you said you never had a chance to look at any of it. You can't tell us today if you would have the same conclusions, right?
I would have to look at the material and go through it and see if my opinions would change or not.
In a first-person narrative, diary / manifesto for the 4 years preceding, or up to the 4 days, up to the February 5th, pretty significant, wouldn't it be?
It could be.
Okay, and you know the term, don't you, malingering?
Yes.
Or malingerer? See, malingerer?
No.
Okay, and a malingerer, again, for us, is somebody faking it.
Someone who's faking a mental disorder.
But, and you did, though, include in your notes, whether you noted it in or your team, he suffers from nightmares, right?
Yes.
Panic attacks. And speaking of panic attack, that was his reporting. Did you see a videotape of him having a panic attack?
No, I understood that he had said that he had videotaped, or he was videotaping himself driving, and he had a panic attack while he was driving, and that was videotaped.
So you knew about it, but you didn't get it
But I
and get to
didn't
observe it,
know
right?
where it
Okay.
existed.
But you say persistent crying. At times they'd see him in the TV room, for instance, crying.
One time, I believe they did, yes.
And he did, on other times, massive sweats
I believe a couple times he described that.
and sleep disorder. That's noted as well, right?
He did report a decrease in sleep.
And you indicated also he was having some type of flashbacks.
He said that was his words, yeah.
Okay. Well, his words, again, did you not find him to be forthcoming with you?
Not forthcoming. I think with regard to the word flashback, when I probed that, Mr. Loya did not describe having a dissociative re-experiencing of a traumatic event. That's important because that's the definition of a flashback.
But you also indicated that he reported he no longer has any enjoyment, right?
Yes,
No sexual wants, right?
yes,
No desire to talk to anybody, right?
yes,
And you took that into consideration, right?
yes.
Did you take into consideration the report, albeit limited, of his rape encounter?
Yes.
Did that seem reality-based to you?
You know, I had no way of being able to know whether it was true or not. I do know that the research indicates that a significant percentage of people, adults, who are psychiatrically hospitalized do have a sexual trauma history. So when I encounter a patient who states that they've been sexually assaulted, I do take it at face value, and I don't think, oh, that person's probably just saying this for whatever reason they might be saying it. So I have no way to investigate whether a sexual assault happened, but certainly I didn't dismiss at all Mr. Loya's description that there was an event, a sexualized event that happened to him that he was very disturbed by, that he then later described as a rape.
And again, very disturbed by,
Yes.
did it sound like a rape to you?
It could have been. I can't say one way or the other whether a sexual assault happened.
Okay, and again, you left us with the words, I had no other way to follow up into looking into the rape, right?
Right. So,
You reached out to that Detective Noble or whoever that police officers were about that?
so in speaking with Mr. Loya about that event, he said that that event took place in Kodiak, Alaska. And he, and I understood that he had gone to see this woman in Kodiak, Alaska, who was, I believe, a social worker. And he would not describe what happened with those sessions except to communicate that he was made worse by the experience and that she did not offer a diagnosis. It might have been helpful had he given me permission to have gotten records from her to see what Mr. Loya had said at that time about that incident.
Did you watch the 4 or whatever hours of the interrogation, Mr. Lawyer? Did you watch that?
No,
Did you ask to get a hold of that so you could watch it?
no,
And again, I think I already asked you, you didn't see the video of the panic attack.
no, did not.
You couldn't judge its authenticity or lack thereof?
No.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Nothing further.
Thank you, sir. You may step aside.
Dr. Edersheim?
Please.
Raise your right hand, please. Solemnly swear testimony to give to the court and the jury and the issues now pending between the Commonwealth defendants bar to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Good morning, Doctor. If you prefer, we can get you a chair. Certainly, I suspect your voice carries best if you stand. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Thank you. I'll stand until I
So
give
you
out.
need a chair.
Yeah,
Fair
thank
enough.
you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
In a nice, loud voice, could you state your name and could you spell your last name, please?
Yes, my name is Judith Gallen Edersheim, Edersheim.
And what is your current occupation in?
I'm a forensic psychiatrist.
And are you licensed to practice in the state of Massachusetts?
Yes, I'm licensed to practice medicine and psychiatry.
Okay. And when were you licensed?
1999.
And what does your current practice consist of?
Well, I have a general psychiatry practice, a forensic psychiatry practice, and I run a research center at Massachusetts General Hospital.
Are you board certified?
I am. I'm board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology in general psychiatry, and I'm sub-boarded in forensic psychiatry.
And what does that mean to be board certified?
It means that you have to have finished an accredited psychiatric residency, medical school residency, and then if you want to be sub-boarded, an accredited fellowship in your subspecialty. Then you have to sit for examinations, both written and oral, in both fields.
And when did you receive those board certifications?
My general psychiatry boards, I believe, were 2002. My forensic psychiatry boards were 2003, and you have to retake them every 10 years. So I just recertified in 2013.
And could you tell us what is forensic psychology?
Well, forensic psychiatry is the subspecialty which deals with mental states and the law. Anytime that a psychiatric disorder, a neurologic disorder, and the law overlap, that's what forensic psychiatry is concerned with.
Does that differ in any way from regular psychology or psychiatry?
It differs because forensic psychiatrists practice in a different context. They have to understand legal standards. They have to be able to apply mental states, disorders, and think about them as they intersect with the legal process.
And I've just made the mistake twice, and I apologize for that, but what's the difference, if there is any, between psychology and psychiatry?
So psychology and psychiatry are very different disciplines. Both concern mental states, but psychiatry requires that you are a medical doctor first and do the diagnosis and treatment of all disorders, then mental disorders, neurologic disorders. So a great deal of my practice is about neuroscience, and for that I use my MD. Psychologists have extensive training in mental states as well, with therapy and but can't prescribe medications because they don't have MDs. But they do psychological testing, neuropsychological testing, and also deal with psychiatric, psychological disorders and mental states.
And would you kindly tell the jury your education and training in this field?
I went to college, and then I went to medical school. I went to Harvard Medical School, and then after medical school, I did a year of medical internship. And then after medical internship, I did 3 years of psychiatric residency. After my psychiatric residency, I did a year of fellowship in forensic psychiatry, in law and psychiatry.
And have you received any specialized training?
Yes. So during my fellowship, that was all specialized training in forensic psychiatry. So there, I spent my time learning about particularly legal contexts, how to think about psychiatric disorders in correctional facilities, in psychiatric mental health facilities run by the Department of Corrections. I was the treating psychiatrist at the Nashua Street Jail. I performed court evaluations for courts in the Commonwealth, and I did other specialized evaluations. I participated in a special Massachusetts training program to be certified to practice before the courts of Massachusetts.
Now, with respect to the areas you just discussed with the correction facilities and such, why would you do that? Why would you engage in that practice?
Well, seeing patients in psychiatric patients or neurologic patients in a legal context is very different from seeing them in your office when you're doing therapy or medications. In your office, the patient's feelings and how patients interpret things is the most important thing, taking care of their feelings and their symptoms. But in a legal context, there is a truth to be discerned, and the context and the truth matter independently. You are not treating someone, you're evaluating someone and deciding whether their narrative fits facts, whether they reach certain legal standards. So it's not about therapy, it's about applying mental states and standards about how people are thinking and acting to the relevant legal state, and that takes special training.
And can you become board certified without going through any training?
No, you have to have a special accredited forensic psychiatry fellowship.
Now, do you possess any other degrees?
Yes.
Tell us about that, please.
I have a law degree. I went to Harvard Law School, and I graduated in 1985.
And how many years did you work as an attorney?
I worked 5 years total, one as a law clerk for a judge, and then 4 as a practicing attorney.
And which came first, the law degree or the medical degree?
Oh, the law degree.
Now, do you hold any hospital positions?
I do.
Could you tell us about that, please?
I am senior consultant to the Law and Psychiatry Service at Massachusetts General Hospital. I'm associate psychiatrist at Massachusetts General Hospital Department of Psychiatry. I'm an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and I'm co-founder and co-director of the Massachusetts General Hospital Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior.
Have you written any articles?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that, please?
I've written many articles in scientific journals, the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law, or the American Journal of Neuropsychiatry, various publications dealing with the overlap of mental states and the law, neuropsychiatric deficits, a whole range of subjects, almost all in forensic psychiatry.
Have you written any book chapters?
Yes.
And what about those, please?
I've written many book chapters on standards for criminal responsibility, standards for competency to stand trial. I've written book chapters on dementia and the law, on neuroimaging in the courtroom is probably my most recent chapter.
Have you conducted any type of research?
Yes.
Tell us about that, please.
So most of what I do during the year and during an average week is to run a research center. And I have a faculty of research psychologists and psychiatrists and legal scholars. And we do research on logic disorders and how they impact mental states, psychiatric disorders and how they impact mental states. We have research programs on memory and the law and a whole host of other programs.
Have you lectured or taught at all?
Yes, I teach.
Tell us about that, please.
I teach in the Forensic Psychiatric Fellowship at Mass General and McLean, teaching people about landmark cases. I had such teaching when I was a fellow, and now I teach in those courses. I teach my peers, my medical peers, at continuing medical education courses through the Mass General Psychiatric Academy. I teach judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys, practicing attorneys through the Flashner Institute, the Judicial Institute, Massachusetts Continuing Legal Education. I was on the board of the Mental Health Legal Advisors Committee, and every spring I co-teach a class at Harvard Law School on applied neuroscience and the law.
And have you testified in the courts of the Commonwealth before?
Yes, I have.
Have you testified in courts other than those of the Commonwealth?
Yes, I have.
Could you tell us about just some of the courts that you've testified in, please?
I've testified in various district courts in the Commonwealth, several superior courts in the Commonwealth, and in federal district court in the Commonwealth, and also in federal court in New Hampshire and in the equivalent of state superior court in New Hampshire.
And what's your connection to this case you're here for today?
The district attorney's office asked me to evaluate the defendant in this case for criminal responsibility.
And did you agree to do that?
I did.
And did you have an opinion with a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to Mr. Loya's criminal responsibility for his current charges?
I do.
And what is that opinion, please?
In my opinion, which I hold to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, Mr. Loya was able to appreciate the criminality and wrongfulness of his behavior and was able to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
All right, in a moment, we're going to go over how you reached that conclusion, but were you paid for the work you did in this case?
Yes,
And what do you charge an hour?
$5.50 an hour,
And how many hours have you spent working on this case thus far?
approximately 90 hours.
And were there any preconditions to your agreeing to work on this case?
No, I don't take preconditions.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, I'm an independent medical evaluator, and I'm required to call them like I see them. I'm required to actually look at the facts of the case and research everything and come to an independent conclusion. So I don't take cases if someone thinks I'm going to come out a certain way on them.
And how long did it take you to reach a conclusion in this case?
Oh, many, many hours.
In evaluating Mr. Loya, did you follow a particular format?
I did.
And could you tell us what that was?
Well, during my training and in the courts of the Commonwealth, there's something called the Designated Forensic Professional Program, and the DFP program sets out a recommended format for criminal responsibility evaluations. It's a similar format to the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law format, and so I followed that one.
And is that the recommended evaluation format?
Yes, it's a suggested format.
And could you tell us what that is?
It's very standardized. It starts the same way with referral information and then sets forth the legal standard that you're supposed to apply to the question you were asked. Then relevant personal information for the defendant, including personal history. Then any medical history of the defendant, any psychiatric history, any psychological tests or neuropsychological tests that were performed. After that, you set forth the Commonwealth's version of the offense, then recount the defendant's version of the offense, then the defendant's mental state, and conclude with your diagnosis and your opinion as to the legal question you were asked.
And I may have already asked this, I apologize if I did, but what state are you admitted to practice law in?
Massachusetts.
And you're familiar with the Massachusetts standard as it relates to criminal responsibility?
I am.
Are there any ethical standards for conducting the evaluation you just described for us?
Yes.
And could you tell us about that, please?
Yes, the American Psychiatric Association has ethical standards that are applied to forensic psychiatry. And they are generally that you have to maintain the confidentiality of a patient, that you have to obtain consent of the patient if it's a certain kind of evaluation. You have to strive for objectivity and honesty. You have to stay within your expertise, not stray outside of matters that you're competent in. And then finally, after you're striving to maintain your expertise, you don't confuse the role of a treater with an evaluator.
And could you just describe a little bit more for us, please, the roles of treater and examiner?
If you're treating a patient, everything that the patient says to you is confidential. And the patient knows this and feels safe in disclosing to you intimate details and secrets and embarrassing things that you are bound to keep confidential. In a forensic matter, you're already in a legal context, and you warn a patient that what the person being evaluated will say actually might be in court, will be written in a report, and will be commented upon and shared with other people. It's very important that people know that you aren't treating them and that what they say to you won't be held confidential.
And do you know, is there a term for disclosing that to the person that's being examined?
Yes, it's called a lamb warning.
And using the procedures that you've just laid out for us here, did you use those procedures in this case?
Yes,
And you formed an opinion, is that right?
I did.
Okay. You told us what your opinion was, correct?
Yes.
And what does that mean? That you formed the opinion what did not lack?
Yes, I phrased it according to the legal standard, but the upshot is that, in my opinion, Mr. Loya was criminally responsible for his actions.
And how did you arrive at that opinion?
Well, I got a referral question from you as to what the opinion was, what you asked me to examine, and then I proceeded to evaluate a fairly voluminous record systematically. So I reviewed Coast Guard and State Police investigative reports about the case. I reviewed videotapes made contemporaneously. I reviewed transcripts of statements which the defendant made to the police. I reviewed videotapes of those statements. I reviewed the defendant's Coast Guard records, Coast Guard investigative reports on victims in the case, Coast Guard, State Police, and Bourne Police interviews of various witnesses and victims and other incidental contacts during the case. I reviewed Mr. Loya's medical record from his time in the Coast Guard. I reviewed his entire Bridgewater State Hospital record up to the moment that it was provided, so that's about 2.5 years' worth. I reviewed the defendant's own writings, which were about 300 pages of text.
Did you have an occasion to review any other reports concerning his mental situation and/or criminal responsibility?
I did. I reviewed a report of Dr. David Holtzen. Actually, more than one report of Dr. Holtzen's. I reviewed a report of Dr. Martin Kelly, and I reviewed a report of Dr. John Dano.
Did you interview Mr. Loya?
No,
Why not?
I wasn't allowed to.
Can you give an opinion without meeting or interviewing the defendant?
Yes, you can.
Okay. And could you tell us why that is?
Well, it's always preferable to talk with a defendant when you're performing a criminal responsibility evaluation. But in many instances, the defendant will decide that he or she doesn't want to speak with you. The defendant may be too impaired to speak with you, neurologically or psychiatrically. Sometimes you're reconstructing a mental state from quite the distant past, and you're using collateral evidence to reconstruct that mental state. So it's not the current mental state that you're examining, it's one in the past. And if you have sufficient collateral evidence, such as contemporaneous statements, writings, videotapes, then you can get a very solid view of what a mental state was like in the past. Sometimes we reconstruct mental states when people are deceased for will contests or testamentary capacity, or people in the hospital when you're trying to evaluate whether they would have consented to something. So we construct mental states all the time. And in this case, there's voluminous contemporaneous evidence on which to form an opinion.
And did you feel that you were able to competently form an opinion based on the materials you had available to you?
Absolutely.
Do you think Mr. Loya suffers from any mental illness?
Yes.
And what would that be, please?
Mr. Loya has a personality disorder, severe sort of maladaptive personality, a combination of two personality disorders.
Now, when you say personality disorder, could you kind of explain what that is to us in more understandable English?
Yes.
Please.
Yes. So a personality disorder is a maladaptive way of relating to other people. And it's a maladaptive way of relating to other people and of your internal sense of yourself. And it is something that is persistent from when you're probably a late adolescent. It's your way of being in the world. It's not episodic, it's continuous. And it's how you relate to other people and how you think about yourself. And it causes distress for you and for other people in work, at home, in relationships, in school.
Now, with your indicating that there were two different personality disorders, is there a textbook or something that you use in an aid to help make that diagnosis?
Yes.
And what would that be?
There is a psychiatric manual of disorders called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's like an encyclopedia of mental disorders, and it sets out the formal criteria or the symptoms and signs that allow you to diagnose something, and so that's what I use.
And in this specific instance, do you know what volume you used?
Yes, the DSM was revised in 2013, so I used the most recent division, the DSM-5.
And do psychiatrists use that DSM-5?
Oh, yes, yes. You can't send a bill without it. You can't admit someone to the hospital without it. You have to categorize the illness according to the DSM.
Are there any warnings in the use of that book concerning forensic evaluations?
Yes. There is a little preamble that says that mental disorders don't map directly onto legal states, so you should use caution when you're diagnosing and applying.
And did you consider those warnings in forming your opinion?
I did.
Did you take any steps to avoid the problems that are warned in that little blurb?
Yes. So it's very important when you're applying a legal standard to understand that you can't just take a diagnosis and say it meets the standard. You actually have to look at the behavior, and you have to look at the thought process, and you have to look at the outcome. So that's what I did. I was very careful to look at symptoms and signs and records and inconsistencies and make sure that I was applying the legal standard to the psychiatric symptoms correctly.
And is that fair to say that you, when you were discounting any other diagnoses, you were also using the book as an aid?
Yes.
And did you solely rely on the DSM-5?
No.
What else did you rely upon?
Well, at this point, I have years of forensic experience in evaluating and treating patients. I have years of experience in forensic settings, in understanding motivations and mental states and disorders. And so I call upon my years of expertise and bring that to bear as well.
So now you've already indicated the two personality disorders that you observed, is that right?
Yes.
And could you tell us, what are the signs of avoidant personality disorder?
Yes. Well, Mr. Loya, in my view, has avoidant personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. And avoidant personality disorder is really characterized by someone who is very insecure, has poor self-esteem, and has a hypersensitivity to rejection. Someone who is very insecure in social situations, has a poor sense of himself, and really fears negative evaluation by other people, critical evaluation. And that is a pervasive characteristic of someone with this disorder.
And were there, for lack of a better word, some characteristics that you'd be looking for that he must have at least some of?
Yes, there's a list. This is how the DSM works. There's usually a list of symptoms, and a person who exhibits several of these symptoms usually fits into the category that you're looking at.
And with respect to that specific diagnosis of avoidant personality disorder,
Yes.
could you tell us what's the list and how many did he have to suffer from in order to meet that criteria?
Yes. I believe he needed 4 or 5 of the list. He had several characteristics of the list. So the list consists of behaviors. For example, feeling insecure in social situations, perceiving people to be shaming or ridiculing him, avoiding situations in which he might be not sure that he would be liked, keeping his feelings to himself in order not to expose himself to shame or ridicule. And Mr. Loya displayed several of those characteristics and met criteria.
And could you describe, from what you used to form your opinion, what characteristics of these that he did, in fact, display?
Well, Mr. Loya was very constrained in social situations, a little shy and a little awkward, someone who was always perceiving negative evaluation, whether he had data for it or not. He had very low esteem, felt ashamed, felt that he would be rejected. So rejection sensitivity is a particularly salient feature of this disorder, where you imagine in advance that people don't like you or aren't going to like you. You try hard, but you keep your feelings very close because you suspect that people won't be nice to you or you'll experience shame. And that really was fairly characteristic of the defendant's functioning as an adolescent and an adult.
Was there anything concerning his being judged negatively?
Yes, people with this disorder feel that they're going to be judged very harshly, that others will think poorly of them and negatively of them, and they look for it around every corner, whether there's reason to or not.
Now, what are the signs of borderline personality disorder?
So borderline personality disorder is a little different. It's characterized by unstable relationships, unstable emotional comportment, unstable affect, and really poor quality, poor sense of yourself, very low self-esteem. And so patients with this disorder struggle with emotional volatility, and there is another long list of qualities that are persistent for this disorder.
And is there a suggestion that there may be a certain number of those that have to be met in order to make that diagnosis?
Yes, I believe, again, it's typically 4 or 5 have to be met.
And could you tell us what is contained on that list?
Yes, patients who suffer from borderline personality disorder, they have tumultuous relationships, and so they overvalue people and then devalue them. You're either marvelous or you're awful, and it happens very quickly. First, you're the best thing since sliced bread, and then you're terrible. So they have very volatile personal relationships. They have a very unstable sense of themselves. They feel empty, they feel hopeless, they feel useless. They have emotional disturbances that are common and intense. So they feel anxious, they feel sad or dysphoric, dysthymic. They feel angry. One salient characteristic of their emotionality is intense and erupting anger. That's a characteristic of that personality disorder, where they erupt in unexpected anger. There is also frequent suicidal ideas or gestures or threats. And then the sequelae of this, the outcome of this, is that they experience great distress. They feel empty and useless and hopeless. They feel sad a lot of the time. And then it changes, and they feel angry or anxious, and sometimes happy, and sometimes elated, and sometimes deflated. But this is a very persistent volatility that harms familial relationships, it harms romantic relationships, it harms work relationships.
What about abandonment?
Patients with borderline personality disorder take great pains to avoid either being abandoned or perceiving that they're being abandoned. It generates a kind of franticness in them that they'll be left or abandoned. And it's a very salient characteristic of folks who suffer from this.
And what about impulsivity?
Many of these patients exhibit impulsive sexual behaviors, impulsive anger, impulsive recklessness or spending. They tend to be out of control transiently in many areas, and then regain their composure.
And how does paranoid ideas fit into that, if they do at all?
If a patient with borderline personality disorder is severely stressed, they may have a very brief paranoid sense. It's usually about common things.
And which of those signs did you see, if you did, in Mr. Loya?
Well, really, almost all of those signs. He more than met criteria for that disorder.
And in your view, how do those personality disorders affect Mr. Loya's life?
Well, these are really pervasive ways of being. It's his personality. He tends to be rejection sensitive, closed, anticipates shame and humiliation. He's sad a lot of the time, and then he has kind of a smoldering anger that bursts out, and feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness. And this has really been uncomfortable for him and for everyone around him at work and home.
And in your research of the records and materials, how would he consider himself in all these situations?
How would he consider himself?
Yes.
Well, the combination of being avoidant and that hypersensitivity to negative estimation and this volatile emptiness makes him very rejection sensitive and angry, and he has very low self-esteem and tends to be angry about rejections.
How would that reflect in terms of him seeing himself as a victim?
Well, Mr. Loya sees himself as a victim, as many patients with borderline personality do. They don't perceive of themselves as aggressors. They perceive of themselves as being on the wrong end of someone else's bad opinion, or someone else is doing something to them or trying to harm them. And the record reflects that Mr. Loya has felt that way about himself.
Now, did you consider any other personality disorders?
Yes, I did.
And could you tell us which ones, please?
Yes, I considered schizoid personality disorder.
And what is schizoid personality disorder?
So schizoid personality disorder is a personality disorder that's related to psychosis. That is, it's related to a thought disorder. And I considered it because Mr. Loya had thought he himself had decided that that was the way he was. But I don't believe that Mr. Loya has schizoid personality.
And why is that?
Well, schizoid personality disorder is a disorder that is characterized by detachment from relationships, that people don't seek relationships, they don't want relationships, they don't want sexual activity, they don't want romantic relationships or friendships, they don't enjoy many activities, they try to be left alone and pursue solitary things, and that isn't at all how Mr. Loya behaved.
And could you describe some of his behaviors that were contrary to someone who might be suffering from a schizoid personality disorder?
Yes, Mr. Loya really behaved in the opposite way from almost all those criteria. First of all, he sought out relationships avidly. He had many friends. He sought out group activities. So he had several friends on the base. He would go over to people's homes. He coached volleyball. He volunteered to coach the kids' swimming team on the base. He went to parties. He went to morale events. He took his friends to gun ranges to do gun practice. He participated in running races and generally invited people over to his home for music nights and rock band nights and to watch movies. He was not a solitary person. He had several friends and even a best friend from childhood, which would be highly uncharacteristic of someone with schizoid personality.
Were you aware about a Thanksgiving that had any specific relevance to your opinion?
Yes, Mr. Loya relished being with other people and relished relationships and relished being with people. He was invited to a home-cooked Thanksgiving at the home of Lisa Berlanga and her family, and he reported in his own writings that he was very grateful to be there and felt special and included in this family meal.
And what about being a Santa Claus?
Yes, people with schizoid personality avoid being with other people. They want to be solitary. Mr. Loya volunteered to be the base Santa Claus. That would bring him in contact with really everyone. He played basketball with other people. He organized social gaming. So he liked solitary video games, but he also liked playing in groups. So he had local access network parties where you could join in group games and group strategy games. And the record indicates that he had several friends. He went over to their homes for dinner. He invited them to parties at his home. He went to bars and restaurants. He was not a solitary person.
And what about any interest in sex?
Yes, Mr. Loya, the record reveals that he had several girlfriends, that he, although insecure, again, in the avoidant personality way, insecure and worried about shame or ridicule, he had sex with women, he had sex with girlfriends, he actually lived with a woman for several months. He had everything from online dating relationships to live-in relationships. He noted in his own memoir that he was proud to have slept with 10 women because he didn't consider himself that appealing. And he also frequented prostitutes or escorts.
Jack, could I have a time frame in this, Your Honor?
I'm sorry?
Could I have a time frame with some of this?
You'll have an opportunity to cross-examine.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And with respect to the praise or criticism, do you have an opinion as to how we reacted to praise or criticism?
Yes, people with schizoid personality disorder, if he had really had it, which I don't think he does, they are indifferent to praise or criticism. Mr. Loya was fixated on praise and criticism. He sought praise from his superiors and from his colleagues. He wanted to be well-liked, giving gifts and soliciting favors and being solicitous of other people. When things didn't go his way, or when he felt rejected or excluded, he would become enraged and tearful. Anytime he felt slighted or excluded, if his superiors reprimanded him, or he was sanctioned for something, or someone didn't invite him somewhere, or even if he felt like the third wheel, he would become very angry or tearful or sad.
So you considered and rejected him as having schizoid personality disorder, fair to say?
Yes.
Now, did the disorders, avoidant and borderline personality disorders, make him unable to appreciate the criminality or wrongfulness of his actions, in your opinion?
No, in my opinion, they were irrelevant to his ability to appreciate criminality or wrongfulness.
And what makes you say that?
Well, the standard that you're referring to now, appreciation of criminality or wrongfulness, is the so-called cognitive prong of the insanity test. And the cognitive prong means that, you have to see whether the defendant has a break with reality in some way, whether the defendant is not able to appreciate the nature or the quality of their actions. So, for example, that killing is wrong, or that his or her actions will end up in killing someone, or that killing someone is a crime. That's a substantial cognitive impairment. It means you have a disorder that takes you away from reality. And there's no evidence in my mind that, the defendant, Mr. Loya, had any break with reality.
And is there evidence that supports that conclusion?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that, please?
Yes, I think when you're thinking about a break from reality, or whether someone can appreciate the difference between right and wrong, or whether something is a crime, you look before, during, and after the crime. So before the crime, having a break from reality and not knowing that what you're doing is wrong is a really fundamental disturbance of thinking. And it doesn't just appear overnight. You look for antecedents in a person's history. And Mr. Loya had none. He had almost no psychiatric history. He had never been treated with a psychiatric medication. He had never had a hospitalization. He had never had any kind of intervention. No one in his childhood, in his adulthood, ever thought that he had a problem with his thinking. In his entire life, he had 2 courses of therapy. One was when he was about 12 years old. He had somewhere actually 9 to 12. His mother reported that he had had a brief course of therapy because he was acting out and roughhousing with his younger brother, and he was told that he should listen to his parents and not be angry. And then he had a brief course of therapy in Alaska, which he said did him no good. So there is no indication that before these events he had any significant psychiatric disturbance. Before all of this happened, he also was a Coast Guard officer under the examination in a very rigid setting of colleagues and friends and superiors, and not a single one of them noticed any abnormality of thinking, which one would expect with this set of disorders. Also, he was seen by medical professionals in Chesapeake and in Yorktown, his 2 Coast Guard postings other than Alaska. He was seen by medical professionals, from my review of the record, maybe 31 times, and not a single one of those noticed any abnormalities of thinking, any break with reality, any psychotic symptoms. In the long term before these events, he showed no inability to think or discern right from wrong.
Now, immediately prior to the events, did you draw on any evidence to help support your conclusions?
Yes, within the same was true for his reality-based behavior immediately before these events. He meticulously planned this crime. He was very thoughtful about how things should go, about what he should order. He practiced, he rehearsed, he planned, and he plotted, and he did that with a clear mind. He also, during that time, was making friends. He engaged in an airsoft team practice in order to hone his shooting skills. He was functioning as an adequate Coast Guard IT officer within 5 weeks of this event. So the likelihood of him exhibiting psychosis during that time is very, very slim. Also, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Also, within a couple of days of the event, he spoke to his best friend, his mother, and his father, and they were interviewed, and they said that he showed no signs of any disturbance of thought or any abnormality. He then interacted with all kinds of people on the way. He had his car fixed when he was driving from Chesapeake to Bourne. He interacted with desk clerks at the motel with whom he chatted normally. He asked about a military discount. He talked about the weather and his drive. And one of the last interactions he had was with an escort whom he called the night before these events. And she was interviewed and said he seemed normal and that she was not in fear of him.
Now, what about during the events themselves?
Well, during the events, he also exhibited what we would consider sound mind, that he was not exhibiting any break from reality. So what you would look for in an evaluation like this is there contemporaneous evidence that he knew what he was doing was wrong? And in this case, there was a mountain of evidence that he knew what he was doing was wrong. One was in his stated motivations. So one way that you tell that someone knows something is wrong is to see whether they're concealing what they're doing. And if you think something's right, you don't hide. So he wore a mask, he wore a disguise, he operated under cover of night, including whatever he was unloading and loading with respect to his car. He set devices to divert police because he understood what he was doing was criminal and they would try to stop him or arrest him. He understood that he should hide his plans from people because they were criminal or wrong, because they would try to stop him. So he told his parents various stories about where he was or what he was doing, made sure they didn't call him on his birthday because he had something else he wanted to be doing. He had a chat with his best friend in order to settle his whereabouts and have them not call him during the events. So he made an effort to conceal his plans, and they were thorough and indicated criminality. The other way that you look at whether someone appreciates wrongfulness is to decide what their motive is.
Tell us about that, please.
One question would be whether Mr. Loya had a non-psychotic motive for this crime, whether it was reality-based, and whether he behaved that way. And in this case, there is evidence, really a great deal of evidence of what Mr. Loya's motives were, because he told us in his Loya Wars Manifesto, he told us what his motives were in great detail, about 265 pages of detail. And then he repeated this motive to the police within hours of the crime.
What did he say the motive was?
He said he hated Lisa Berlanga, that he wanted revenge, and he said that this was a very personal act of revenge. I hate her, he said, I hated her, and he called it a vendetta.
And did he indicate that it was an act of revenge?
Yes, he said it was a very personal act of revenge, and he didn't want it to be mistaken for anything else.
And was there something telling concerning that he considered it so wrong?
Yes, his own writings talk about whether he thinks it's wrong or whether he thinks it's the right thing to do. And his own writings show that he's very, very angry, but that he understood that this is his words, that he would be considered a villain, that this plot he termed was evil, and that it was appropriate that he die as well. That it would be appropriate if he took a life that his life would be taken. And he also had a contemporaneous plan that he didn't want to shoot within the apartment, within the Trebnikova's apartment, because he didn't want to shoot someone else, indicating that he understood that shooting was wrong. So he didn't want to shoot through the apartment walls in case someone else was harmed. He took pains not to invade the wrong home to make sure that he didn't kill the person he didn't intend to kill.
Now, after the fact, did you observe anything that assisted in your opinion?
Yes.
Tell us about that, please.
Well, I reviewed his entire manifesto, and one thing that I want to add is that he made apologies to various people, indicating he knew that his behavior was wrong and criminal. And after the fact, there is a videotape of his statements to the police, which show a linear, calm person talking about the crime, giving motive and giving his plans, and indicating, he used the phrase, I believe, "I'm guilty of everything that happened," or a similar phrase, using the word guilty. And he was calmly recounting his motive, his hatred, his vendetta, his plans, in a way that indicated that he did not show signs of a thought disorder.
Was there any evidence that he was suffering from delusions or hallucinations?
None.
Now, since the crime, what evidence have you used to support your opinion?
Well, in this case, Mr. Loya has been almost continuously observed by mental health clinicians because he's been an inpatient at Bridgewater State Hospital, where he's monitored very closely every day by social workers and psychologists and psychiatrists and forensic psychiatrists.
And so as to the first aspect, your opinion is that he was able to appreciate the wrongfulness of his act, correct?
Yes, not a single one of those clinicians has noticed in 2.5 years, not a single one has noted any break with reality, any psychosis, any hallucinations, and he has not been diagnosed with a psychotic disorder.
Now, do these disorders, the avoidant and borderline personality disorders, make it hard for him to conform his behavior to the requirements of the law? Do you have an opinion about that?
I do.
And what's that opinion?
No, they do not.
And could you explain that a little bit for us, please?
Yes, what you're discussing now is the second prong of the insanity defense standard. It's called the volitional prong. What it means is that someone is not guilty by reason of insanity if they cannot control their behavior, if they cannot conform their behavior to the requirements of the law. Not will not, but cannot. And so the volitional prong asks one to look at that distinction and determine whether someone could control themselves.
And what's the evidence that you see that supports Mr. Loya was able to control his behavior, but simply chose not to?
Well, again, you would look systematically before, during, and after the events. So before the events, in general, Mr. Loya has been able to conform his behavior to a high degree of conformity. He chose a profession that requires a high degree of social and personal comportment and conformity. It's quite formal, it's quite regimented. There's no evidence that he demonstrates a pervasive, out of control, dysregulated, uncontrollable set of behaviors. He's never shown that in any setting before these events. He planned this crime in meticulous detail with rehearsals and sequences and reconnaissance missions. He went over every detail exhibiting a tremendous degree of behavioral control while working as a Coast Guard officer and maintaining a stable household and managing his affairs. Even his transition out of the Coast Guard was orderly and meticulous and careful, including separation prelims, disposing of his personal materials. Everything was orderly and in behavioral composure. So before these events, there was no sign that he was unable to control himself or behave himself.
Did you observe any evidence concerning an ambivalence about going through with the episode?
Yes, in order to establish, or at least look at the defense of absence of volitional control, you want to see that someone is unable to control themselves, not unwilling. And one indicator is whether they exhibit changes of mind, whether they are pondering and deciding to do something, as opposed to whether they're compelled to do something. And in Mr. Loya's case, he wrote about his own ambivalence and about his own possible turning back because he was weighing things. He wasn't compelled to do things. So, for example, he wrote about the fact that one of his friends might be transferred to the base in Chesapeake. I think it was Matt Blank. One of his friends, and that if that happened, he would turn back because he would be happy about that happening. He said the same thing about getting good reviews. He got good reviews from his commanding officers. He was surprised. That made him happier, so maybe he would turn back. Or he said if a special someone walked into his life, that might make him change his mind. So there was weighing going on before, and that indicates that you can control yourself. You're just choosing not to.
Did you consider the reconnaissance mission as it played into whether or not he could control his actions?
Yes.
Jury about that, please.
So Mr. Loya went on a reconnaissance mission in order to make sure that he was going to invade the apartment that he wanted to invade, and to see, to look at tactical options and to place a trail camera outside the home. But during that reconnaissance mission in October, he actually saw one of the victims. He saw Lisa Berlanga and did nothing. He didn't attack her, he didn't approach her. That indicates a high degree of volitional control. He actually did refrain from the crime and stayed in his vehicle and did not approach her. So you have to consider that a contemporaneous exhibition of control.
And just so that we're all clear, when you say Lisa Berlanga, you understand that that's her maiden name and that she's also known as Lisa Trebnikova, right?
Yes, I don't mean any disrespect by that. I'm trying to make a distinction between Lisa and Anna.
Right. Now, what about during the crime itself? Was there any evidence concerning his control? Yes,
Mr. Loya exhibited a high degree of behavioral control during the event itself. Volitional control is the ability to control your actions, the ability to contemplate your actions. And Mr. Loya showed the ability not only to control his behavior, but to switch course, to change options. He had what he considered a dialogue or a back and forth with Lisa during these events. He decided to change course. He was originally, by his own writings, and his own discussions, he was going to stab Lisa Berlanga Trebnikova, but he chose not to because the situation wasn't going the way he had planned. So he changed course and he decided to use a pistol instead. He had decided that he was going to die by police fire originally. By his statements, he felt that it was appropriate that he die, and he was going to die by police fire. But during the heat of this moment, he was able to change his mind, decide he didn't want to die, surrender peacefully, and control his actions to the point where he removed a camera from his own body so that the police would not mistake it for an incendiary device and shoot him. So this exhibited a high degree of behavioral control during the events.
What about the decision to shoot one or both women?
Well, by his own discussion with the police and his discussion with a corrections officer very immediately after these events, he decided that he would change course, that he didn't originally think that he wanted to shoot Anna or hurt Anna. He was going to spare her and kill Lisa. But because, by his own admission, by his own statements to the police, the plan wasn't properly executed, he said, he lost control of the situation and decided he was going to shoot both of them. So this was a change that he made, an adaptation to changing circumstances that indicates significant volitional control.
What about in his interviews with the police?
Well, it's a great advantage to having a collateral piece of data that shows the defendant's state of mind in a videotape and in a transcript. In that videotape, he is calm, he is not belligerent, he is not out of control, he doesn't exhibit any volitional deficits. He is calmly reporting to the police extensively his plans, his motives, his actions, why he did what he did in great detail with no evidence of any behavioral or volitional disturbance.
And what about items that took place after the crime?
Well, after the crime, Mr. Loya gave an extensive statement to the police, which was transcribed and videotaped. He gave a very extensive, similar statement to Officer Horrigan, who was a corrections officer, who took a statement from him after an appropriate warning. And in that, he recounted, again, his hatred, his motives, his plans, and what he had accomplished. And then immediately thereafter, he was transferred to Bridgewater State Hospital with continuous observations of his behavior. And there, he has behaved in a very well-controlled, presented in a well-controlled, well-adapted manner. He originally was in seclusion because of the thoughts that he might try to harm himself. Shortly thereafter, he was stepped down to B1 unit, then he was stepped down to C unit, which is a minimum security unit. He's functioned freely as a runner and as a cleaner on that unit. A job indicates appropriate comportment and self-control, and he has been, without any standing medications other than, medications that he can ask for, he has been in good behavioral control for most of the time.
And was there specific incidents that you observed while he was at Bridgewater concerning an altercation?
Yes, the record of his hospitalization shows entries for, I believe, February 7th, 2017, when he reported, or it was observed that he had a fight with another patient. He told Bridgewater staff that the patient had assaulted him, and then later videotape evidence showed that the opposite was true, and he had assaulted the patient.
Now, based on all of what you just described, you have an opinion as to whether he could or could not conform his conduct to the requirements of the law, correct?
Yes.
What was that again?
My opinion is that Mr. Loya was able to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
Now, did you have an occasion to consider whether or not Mr. Loya has Asperger's or is someplace on the autism spectrum?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that, please.
Yes, Dr. Kelly, another forensic clinician, gave the opinion that Mr. Loya was suffering from autism spectrum disorder. And in my opinion, he does not suffer from autism.
And why is that? Why is it that your opinion?
Autism is a childhood neurodevelopmental disorder. It's in the limelight right now because of its great prevalence, but it is a childhood disorder. It is usually diagnosed in the first 12 to 24 months of life. There are serious and profound symptoms if you have an autistic spectrum disorder. It can be milder or it can be more severe. In rare cases, it can be diagnosed later, but typically in the United States, where there are pediatricians who screen for autism, where public schools screen for autism, it's usually diagnosable. But these are very serious impairments, and they're quite noticeable, and they're noticeable at a very young age.
And could you give us some examples of those types of impairments?
Yes, patients who have autism have difficulty communicating. They have difficulty with motor coordination. They're fixated on certain sounds or sensitivities or food or objects. They perseverate with their speech. So if you say something, they might repeat it back to you. Johnny, come here. And Johnny says, here, here, here. They have unusual motor behaviors where there could be flapping or lack of reciprocity. Parents of kids with autism sometimes say that there's no reciprocity. When they reach out, the child doesn't reach back. When they try to play, the child doesn't engage. It can be more or less, but it can't be none. Shyness, awkwardness is not autism.
So you don't think Mr. Loya is suffering from any disease on the autism spectrum?
No, I don't.
And could you just go into a little more why you don't think he specifically is suffering from that?
Yes, there's an extensive record of Mr. Loya's comportment and behavior, including video evidence and interviews with people. Mr. Loya doesn't exhibit any problems with motor behavior, communication, language, gestures. He's really very adept at all those things. He understands the subtle meanings of things. He makes inside jokes. He understands sarcasm. He knows how to give people the silent treatment. And these are all things that someone with Asperger's or autism wouldn't be able to do. He has friends. He understands, and his favorite things are Star Trek and situation comedies, Modern Family or The Simpsons or shows like that, which require a very subtle understanding of humor. One of his friends described him as a comedian. He had relationships. They were tumultuous, but that's because he has a personality disorder, not because he has a neurodevelopmental disorder.
And what about understanding or having conversational or cues or gestures?
Someone with Asperger's or someone who has autism spectrum disorder would have peculiar gestures. Sometimes the gestures wouldn't sync with the speech. Sometimes the emotions and the gestures would be out of sync with each other. Mr. Loya doesn't show any of that.
What about understanding social norms?
Yes, folks who suffer from autism or Asperger's have a hard time understanding social behavior at a very rudimentary level, what they should do when, what other people's facial expressions mean, or what other people's directions mean. And Mr. Loya functioned in an environment that required a keen understanding of one's role. In the military, social cues and comportment and context matter. So his ability to survive in that environment really indicates no problems with social context.
And what about reaching out for emotional support when stressed?
Again, Mr. Loya was not a solitary person. When he had emotional difficulties, he reached out. There's evidence in this case of reaching out to a number of friends, his sister, people over Skype, trying to get a read on his emotional take on things when he was upset about something and reaching out for support. And that reciprocity would be highly uncharacteristic of someone with autism.
What about his range of interests?
Yes, so autistic people or people with Asperger's sometimes have a very restricted range. They fixate on one kind of object or one kind of activity and do it to a pathological extent. That's not true for Mr. Loya. He had a wide range of interests: basketball, swimming, video games, running, working out, television shows, bars, restaurants. He liked to fly kites. He had all kinds of activities that he pursued, and he wasn't fixated on any one thing.
Now, did you consider whether or not Mr. Loya was suffering from a functional delusional system?
Yes, I did.
And what was your opinion concerning that?
My opinion is that he did not suffer from any delusional disorder or any delusions.
And why is that?
A delusional disorder is exceedingly rare. It's about 0.02% of the population, or 0.02%. And it is, so not only is it vanishingly rare, it has very strict requirements in the DSM. A delusion is a fixed false belief. It can be bizarre or non-bizarre, but it has to be false. And it has to be false, and you hold that belief to the contrary. So someone believes that he's being poisoned by his mom. that would be a false delusion. And when you tried to tell him that, no, it was just chocolate pudding, it wasn't poison, they would say, no, 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 I know it's poison. That's a delusion, a fixed false belief that you hold despite evidence to the contrary. And there's no evidence that Mr. Loya holds such beliefs.
And with respect to those ideas, what ideas did he have that were in fact true?
Mr. Loya's personality disorder makes him react vehemently and excessively to things that other people would brush off or forget about. And Mr. Loya had this idea that he was sexually assaulted by Ms. Berlanga-Trepnikova. And although he said that he was sexually assaulted, he didn't believe it in a delusional manner. He was quite reality-bound about it. He knew what he was thinking. What he reported was actually true, not delusional. There's no reason to believe that they didn't have a bad night together. I, of course, don't know what you've heard about that, but I can summarize that in 2012, Ms. Berlanga reportedly invited Mr. Loya over to her home. She was intoxicated. She asked him to bring additional liquor. They drank liquor, and she made unwanted advances towards him, which he declined. Then he became very angry, and a great deal ensued after that. But Mr. Loya was always clear to the police in his own writings, and really every time he uttered this, that only he calls it a sexual assault, that his private parts of his body were neither touched nor invaded, that he was not assaulted, he said, and he did not assault her. He expressed anger at being rejected after this, that she would no longer hang out with him, that she expressed that he was interfering with her new marriage, and that he shouldn't text her anymore, and he shouldn't come over, and they wouldn't hang out anymore. And it was his rage over that motivated this action.
Did he say anything concerning if he'd get in trouble or not?
Yes, he expressed concern, lots of concerns about that night. He expressed concern that as a superior officer, he was of higher rank, he should not be bringing liquor to the home of a married subordinate, and that he might get in trouble. That because Ms. Berlanga-Trepnikova was intoxicated and didn't remember what happened, perhaps he would be accused of sexual assault. And he was concerned about that and reached out to his friends to relay these concerns, to his best friend Jake Heller, to his sister, to various colleagues on the base, to see what he should do.
And did he consider his not being considered the victim itself?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
His not being the victim himself?
Yes, he stated that it was very upsetting for him and that it was confusing for him, but that he was the victim of this and not Ms. Berlanga-Trepnikova. That although it wasn't that he doesn't consider it a rape, that the Coast Guard doesn't consider it a rape, that he was disturbed by it and it made him angry. He wanted to be known as the hero who stood up for not sleeping with her. That was the right thing to do, but instead he was blamed, and he was very angry about it.
And what about the reports of the happy picture concerning her getting a promotion?
Yes, well, there was a great deal of time that elapsed between that, what he called the bad night, and then the events. So he was transferred, he took a transfer from Kodiak to Chesapeake. There was 18 months of planning, and when he got to Chesapeake, his anger was rekindled for several reasons. His anger with Lisa was rekindled.
And did he consider her a present threat to him?
No, his anger was not rekindled because she was a threat. A colleague texted him a picture of Lisa and Anna together looking happy, and that made him very angry. Then he heard that Lisa got a promotion. And at the same time, when he arrived at Chesapeake, he got an administrative remark letter. It's called a page 7, which admonished him for his poor conduct in Alaska, for unsolicited amorous advances towards Lisa Berlanga-Trebnikova, and for behaving in a way that disrupted his unit. And when he got that page 7 and he heard she was promoted and he saw a picture, he was very angry that she was happy, and he didn't get the heroic affirmation that he really had wanted. He said the hero was called the villain.
I'm sorry?
He wrote that the hero was the villain, and it made him very upset.
And would you consider that a delusion?
No, that was the fact. The fact was that he thought he behaved properly. He wasn't sure he behaved completely properly because he brought liquor to the home of a married subordinate, but he thought he behaved properly in not accepting her advances. Afterwards, they had several skirmishes, but that made him very angry. So there was nothing delusional about his motive. He hated that she was happy. He hated that he couldn't hang out with them. He hated that they weren't friends. And he hated that people didn't see him as a good guy.
Has he ever shown in the records that you reviewed any psychosis?
No, no psychotic symptoms whatsoever.
Now, do you agree or disagree that Mr. Loya had a concrete and rigid moralistic core?
No, I don't.
Why not?
Mr. Loya thinks of himself as a victim and has some fantasies that he's like a superhero or like a Star Wars hero. But one has to, as a forensic psychiatrist, you don't take someone's view of what they are necessarily. You also have to look at their behavior. And he doesn't behave as someone who has a rigid moralistic code.
Could you explain that?
Yes, there are various points in the record which show transgressions. For example, early in his career, actually in his late adolescence and his early adulthood, he got a DUI. He got drunk at a party, he drove drunk and was arrested. I think that was in 2008. Then he went clubbing with a girlfriend in Mexico. He pulled a prank and he slapped a woman's buttocks, a stranger on the dance floor. Then he and a friend urinated on the woman's car, and she was angry. Several years later, he illegally had this woman in his base housing in California. She spent time with him against Coast Guard rules. He didn't behave in a morally rigid way. For example, he decided he would stay with friends on the Coast Guard base, a married couple. I believe their name was Frisco. He lived with them and pocketed his Coast Guard housing allowance that was a violation of Coast Guard rules, and stated he was afraid he would be found out. He repeatedly insulted his female commanding officer at Chesapeake. I'm not sure I should use the words, but he called her profane names, referred to her stupidity, said he couldn't believe that bitch had become a chief. So no, he could lie and he could do bad things. So no, I don't believe he had a rigid moral code. He broke a promise to Ms. Berlanga-Trebnikova. He promised the night after their bad night that he would never say anything, and within 2 weeks told her colleagues on this small Alaska base what he called big juicy gossip about that night and her.
Now, did you consider, in forming your opinion, or even these assertions, that Mr. Loya was victimized by his colleagues and he wasn't the aggressor?
Allow the jury their morning recess, Mr. Gondon. Take your break. Jury's out of the room. Anything further at this time, counsel?
Oh, you are.
Not by the Commonwealth.
Morning break, please.
Jurors entering, all rise, please. The court is now in session. Please be seated.
The doctor's coming back in. I took my notes out. I forgot to bring them back in.
I'm sorry?
I took my notes out with me and I just forgot to bring them back in. Can I just go run and grab them?
Sure.
Thank you.
What's that young lawyer that's with you? What does he do? Nothing.
I believe we were just discussing whether or not you considered the suggestion that Mr. Loya was victimized by his colleagues and was not an aggressor. Could you just expound upon that, please?
Yes, Mr. Loya had a picture of himself in keeping with his personality, maladaptive personality, particularly avoidant and borderline, of being victimized. He was looking around every corner for slights and whether people were mistreating him. But he had very little insight into the fact that he was often the aggressor in situations, and that he didn't appreciate or acknowledge.
And do you have any specific examples of that?
Yes. For example, Mr. Loya was very jealous of Lisa Berlanga-Trubnikova's association with another Coast Guard officer. She didn't like the fact that that there was a close friendship with a man named Luke Little. And Lisa and Luke were working together. He acknowledged that he was jealous, and he pulled rank to try to separate them. When he would be angry with Lisa, what he perceived as, he said that for every Loya bad act was a Lisa bad act. He attributed every bad thing he did to his feelings that she was slighting him. So he called it going full robot on her, where he would make the suggestion that he would then all of a sudden, instead of being friendly, he would pull rank and become very rigid. I remember one incident when they had been in a dispute and he embarrassed her, he humiliated her in a public assembly and then was chastised for it by his superior officer. There's also, I think, an incident in which he was insubordinate to a superior officer in a public meeting, rolling his eyes and being sarcastic. He was also disciplined for that. Not disciplined, he was, the chief actually called him and had a discussion with him saying that it was inappropriate. There was an incident when he was leaving the base. He had an exit interview with a superior officer named Ryan. And he was insulting to Ryan, saying that in his exit that the base was run very poorly, that the superiors were ignorant, that they didn't have knowledge of what was going on, that they weren't interested and they weren't involved. And then the chief was very angry with him for those statements, felt that they were inappropriate, and disciplined him for it. So he could be aggressive if he wanted to, but didn't really understand that.
And was there an example concerning his parking near the Trebnikova's home?
Yes, there are a couple of examples which specifically involved the Trebnikovas. One was Chief Church. So Anna called Chief Church, who lived near them, and Chief, to say that Mr. Loya was parked outside their home, and to ask Chief Church to do something. Chief Church, by report, walked out and told Mr. Loya to move, to not park outside their home. This was reported by a Coast Guardsman named Grullen, I believe, Daniel Grullen. When Mr. Loya had discussion with Mr. Grullen about it, he said that he was there to prevent a robbery in the Trubnikova home.
Mr. Lawyer said that, correct?
Yes. I recall another incident where Mr. Loya, so again, people with personality disorders, they see slights everywhere. They see insults and rejections. So there was an incident where Anna was sitting in a car. She waved to Mr. Loya. He interpreted this as making fun of him or being sarcastic towards him. And so he then screamed. This was on base. He then had a screaming episode at Lisa, and then he retired to another room, and then this is by his own report, he summoned Lisa to talk with him again, and by that time, she asked a colleague to be her protective escort to go back and see him because she was concerned.
Was there something about him calling Anna something?
Yes, during the screaming about the fact that Anna had waved to him, he screamed at Lisa, "Your wife is a dick." And then Lisa became fearful, and then when he summoned her again, she brought the protective escort with her.
And was there something concerning him sending a message to Lisa?
Yes, he could. Lisa perceived him as an angry person, as an angry man, whom she said was ruining her life. And Mr. Loya, after the bad night, had initiated a Coast Guard investigation of the evening, claiming that he had been sexually assaulted. During the pendency of the Coast Guard investigation, they were supposed to stay away from each other. But instead of abiding by that, Mr. Loya said to a colleague, "Tell Lisa hi and I miss her." That was considered misconduct, and he was warned that if he kept approaching Lisa Trubnikova, that a restraining order might have to be taken out.
And what about the page 7?
The page 7 was the culmination of all of this turmoil and aggression on base. The page 7 was his administrative remark letter that said that he had behaved in an inappropriate way with Lisa, that he had made unsolicited amorous advances, and that he needed to control his comportment at work and not make such advances, that he had undermined the team. I believe it said causing angst to the team.
And during your review of all the documents and such, did you have an opinion as to whether or not Mr. Lawyer had trouble being untruthful?
I don't believe he had trouble being untruthful. I think he could be untruthful if he desired.
And do you have anything to point to in the records about that?
Yes, he had various instances where he was not forthcoming, didn't tell the whole truth, or concealed things from his superiors, like housing women. Angie Vasquez came to visit him in California, and he housed her in his apartment against regulations. He pocketed his Coast Guard housing allowance when he was living with friends and didn't disclose that. He could break promises. He promised Ms. Trubnikova, he promised Lisa that after they had discussed the bad night and she apologized, that he wouldn't tell anyone, and within 2 weeks had told many of her male colleagues on the base. He produced a letter to Lisa. It was called a letter to Lisa. It was a 20-page statement of his affection for her and his love for her, and his feelings about their relationship. And she was upset and offended by it, asked him to tear it up, and he tore it up in front of her, but never told her that there was a copy in the email already sent to Anna, for example. He has had various incidents at Bridgewater when he was not truthful. For example, Dr. Holtzen commented in the records that he told different stories to Dr. Holtzen than he did to his treatment team. He lied about the assault on February 7th, saying that the patient attacked him until the videotape showed that he attacked the patient. He told his pharmacologist, his treating pharmacologist, that he was feeling much better and didn't need his meds. And then it turned out that he admitted that that was not the truth, that he just didn't want the medications crushed.
And what about Mr. Loya being a loner and having no friends?
No, that's not true. Mr. Loya is shy, runs on the shy side, and is sometimes awkward, but no, he had friends at every base. There were friends in the record. There were extensive interviews with 5 or 6 colleagues who considered him friends. Dan Grullen, Matt Blank, Michael Green, Jeremy Good. These are all colleagues with whom he went to bars and he went to restaurants. He attended parties. He went to holiday parties, morale events, gun ranges. He had parties at his own home with these people. He had something called Rock Band, where it was a video game that you play with other people simulating rock instruments with a controller. He had strategy games that he played with people. He ran running races. He played basketball. He coached teams. He was not a loner. He volunteered to be the base Santa Claus. He volunteered to coach the kids' swimming team on base. So no, he was a person who enjoyed the company of others and spent time with others.
Now, ma'am, did you produce a report with relationship to this?
I did.
Could you just tell me if you can identify what this is?
Yes, this is my report.
Can I offer this?
By agreement.
Next number exhibit, please.
38.
So, ma'am, it's your opinion that Adrian Loya was criminally responsible on the night of February 5th of 2015, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Cross-examination if you wish.
Thank you. Drew Segadelli, here on behalf of Mr. Loya. Your report's dated sometime in the latter part of July, is that fair?
Yes, I believe.
Now, you were originally contacted, retained by the district attorney's office, approximately when, ma'am, as best you can?
I believe December, but I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, November or December of 16,
Yes,
is that fair?
yes,
And that was on the heels, did you understand, of the district attorney's office having received Dr. Kelly's evaluation?
I was not privy to when they received anything.
Okay, but you understand what Dr. Kelly's opinion is on this, that
I do now, yes.
there was a lack of criminal responsibility.
Yes, I do.
Okay. And after that, the district attorney's office sought you out and sought your assistance in this case and to evaluate my client.
Yes,
So sometime, whether it be November or December, up to your completion of the report was July, again, I think it's the 27th.
something like that.
But you keep a very busy schedule, do you not, Doctor? And it's fair to say that you set aside, in fact, the month of July to work on this case so you can complete it and give it to the district attorney's office. Is that fair?
Only the writing.
Okay. So you started working on it, the sources of information and so on, so forth, approximately when?
I can't be exact, but probably January.
Okay, and so it's fair for us to assume January and February and March. Again, your schedule, as you told it to us, you worked some on the lawyer case in those succeeding months.
Yes,
In April and May?
I believe so. I'd have to look at the records, but I believe so.
I mean, there was a Worcester Superior Court case you were dealing with, right? And giving an opinion for somebody. There was, remember that?
Court case.
Worcester Superior. Just for yourself, let's talk to perhaps this paragraph, just to yourself.
Oh, yes, a report due. I wasn't in court.
Having read that, does that refresh your recollection?
Yes,
too? Okay.
yes.
And likewise, so you had some business with Worcester Superior Court. You had some business testify pursuant to your training experience, I think up in the state of Maine on a civil case and some other work as well, right?
I was working on other cases.
Okay. Well, my question to you, Doctor, when was it that the district attorney's office told you specifically that you now were invited to see Mr. Loya? When did that happen?
Again, I can't be exactly sure, but I believe it was May.
Okay. It was sometime after, if you know, after the trial of this matter had to be moved because your evaluation wasn't done. Is that fair?
I'm sorry, I was not privy to those details.
Well, that letter I just showed you was written for a purpose to the district attorney's office, why you need more time, because of your schedule.
For my own schedule.
Your own schedule, honestly. And it was after that letter, ma'am, that you were told you're not invited anymore, you can't see Mr. Loya. Isn't that fair? In and around that time?
I can't be sure, but within a couple of months, but I can't be sure.
So our best then would be the June-ish, where it was told to you that you're no longer, the door isn't open to go see Mr. Loya, right?
Again, I would have said May, but the inner workings of the DA, I'm not sure.
But you started with the case, again, we said November, sometime after Thanksgiving, or I did, you said December, but it was till May, you had 5 months to seek him out, sit with him, talk to him, right? And you didn't avail yourself of that.
That's not so. I always made it clear that I wanted to see him.
Well, again, perhaps I'm not saying it right. From your being retained by the district attorney's office,
Yes.
right? For the next, whether it be 4, 5, or 6 months, you were able, if you had the time, to go see Mr. Loya, were you not?
Yes, that's not the reason I didn't see him, however.
Well, you didn't ultimately see him because come June or August, by that time you were told you can't see him anymore, right?
That's not the reason that I didn't want to see him in January, February, March. I had a reason for waiting.
Okay. Well, is it fair to us to assume when you're doing the professional evaluation, it's very important to see the particular individual? True?
It's certainly preferable.
You do your mental status review of the person, right?
Yes.
And in fact, not only once, you like to see them on several occasions because you could do that mental status review, number one, right? And number two, you at times can see them in different environments, whether it be a hospital setting or a jail setting, right?
Yes, in this case, he was only in one setting.
Okay. But generally, and you might see them when they're being treated with some type of medication or not treated with medication, right?
Yes.
Because the person might appear differently or report differently to you pursuant to that evaluation. True?
Yes, there are a whole host of reasons why, when and why you decide to see someone.
And there's certain guidelines that you follow, whether it's the APL or those other initials you give, where they strongly recommend, ethically, that you should avail yourself to see the person. True?
Yes, as I said, I requested to see him and was not permitted.
Okay, when did you make that request?
I believe that my formal request for an appointment was in May.
Okay, and again, it was November when you came on, and your formal request wasn't until May. Fair for us now to get down with that?
I don't even believe the engagement letter in this case was signed until December or January.
Okay, you need an engagement letter before you can assume the representation?
Yes, before I can enter a representation.
Likewise, agree with me, you're a lawyer, true, and you're a doctor.
Yes?
In this case, you assume the responsibilities of a doctor, meaning objectively to analyze. and-
Absolutely.
Is that fair? Because as a lawyer, you represent your client, true?
I'm not functioning as a lawyer in this case. I'm
I was gonna ask you,
a
You
doctor.
wear two hats, I'm sorry, I don't want to. But at times, you wear two hats, being a lawyer and a doctor.
It is not appropriate for me to function as a lawyer in a case in which I am a physician and functioning as a forensic
You
psychiatrist.
don't have any trouble differentiating those two professions, and you didn't in this case?
No, I haven't practiced law since 1990, maybe.
Okay. Now, in your source of information, Doctor, you suggest that you looked at Dr. Daniel's report. In fact, drawing your attention up, I think it was your page 19, and I'll give it to you if you want. Your report includes a section saying reviewing Dr. Daniel's report, and you said that he did not obtain the administrative, psychological, or neurological tests regarding Mr. Loya and his mental function. True?
Could I see?
You mean yours, to refresh perhaps? I suggest,
Are you reading from me?
no, your report, page 19.
Yes, I see.
That he did not review those.
That he did not obtain or administer psychological or neuropsychological tests.
Right, and you reviewed Dr. Daniel's report thoroughly, fair?
I believe so, yes.
Now, one moment, Your Honor.
Please.
Page 37. Please, as you indicated, you reviewed Dr. Daniel's report thoroughly, did you not, ma'am?
I did.
Now, showing you what's page 37, Dr. Daniel's report, I'd like to draw your attention to paragraph 3.
This is his report?
Yes. Please read for yourself paragraph 3, just for yourself, under the section Bridgewater State Hospital.
Yes.
Does Dr. Daniel there quote there the test results that were performed at Bridgewater State Hospital?
Yes, I quote these also in my report.
Those are the same psychological tests that you quote on your page 18, right?
That's correct.
So you agree with me that your view of Dr. Daniels did not obtain any psychological testing was an error by you?
No, actually, that's not true. Dr. Dano is a psychologist who is able to order his own psychological testing or conduct his own psychological testing.
Correct.
This is Bridgewater's testing he's referring to, not his own. And he didn't have, apparently, I didn't get the complete copy of these, and I believe Dr. Dano didn't have them either. So this isn't his obtaining or administering.
Oh, no, I agree with you on that one, but you suggested that he didn't even review their testing.
Oh, no, that's not what I'm suggesting. I think we're talking about a term of art here. Obtaining or administering means he didn't order another clinician to come in and test him, and he didn't give the testing.
But he utilized their testing, did he not?
I don't know how much of that testing he saw. I tried to obtain that testing, and I could only get a paragraph of that testing that was referred to in Dr. Holtz's report. I tried many, many times because I wanted to review the complete record before I was able to see Mr. Loya. So I wanted that psychological testing, asked for it repeatedly, and didn't get it. So I don't know whether he got it and I didn't, but I quoted only the paragraph of that testing that was in Dr. Holtz's report.
And you just suggested you wanted to see something before you went to see Mr. Loya, right?
Yes, I wanted to see as much as I could.
When was that?
Well, I was reviewing all along. I asked for additional records. I was waiting for them to come in. So, for example, when the case began, I didn't have any treatment records from Bridgewater, and it took a very long time to get those. And when I got them, they were over, 300-400 pages of records, and I had to go through them to see what his condition was and what he was diagnosed with and what the observations of him were. So I don't know if Dr. Dano had testing that I didn't. I would be surprised.
Okay. Now, so are you telling us now today that you wanted to wait to obtain all the other sources of information before you, while you were invited to go see Mr. Loya, you never availed yourself of that? You wanted to wait to get all the other information reviewed before you went to see Mr. Loya? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I had no idea that I would be prohibited from seeing him. There was no deadline put to me, and I wanted to. So when you do a criminal responsibility evaluation, if you get to see someone's mental state immediately after the offense, that's very useful because it's close in time. You should rush. But if you're seeing them 2.5 years after the offense, then it's best to read everything, make sure you know what your questions are, make sure if there are inconsistencies in the record, you would like to reconcile them or at least give the defendant the opportunity to talk about them and then see him. So I had no reason to believe that I would be prohibited from seeing him.
Yet you didn't avail yourself of seeing him January, February, March, April, or May. Is that fair?
I did not see him in those months.
Now, you state in your sources of information review Dr. Kelly's report, correct?
I did.
And I'd like to draw your attention, if I could, please, to Dr. Kelly's report on page 13, and so the record reflects I'm heading up to the witness. This is 135. Sorry, Doctor.
Page.
13. Let me know when you're done reading it, please.
The whole page?
His conclusion. The last paragraph, I'm sorry, on page 13.
Yes.
Okay, and you see that Dr. Kelly, and Dr. Kelly spent some 9 hours with Mr. Loya, you know that?
Yes, between 8 and 9, I think.
Right. And he indicates that his, meaning Mr. Loya's actions on that evening were under the control of a functionally paranoid delusional system, and he was incapable of a force of personal will to stop the system and the ultimate homicide. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And you'd agree with me that that sentence we just reviewed from Dr. Kelly's report was a critical, a central one to his ultimate opinion, right?
This is his conclusion. I can't say it's weight to him.
Did you include that, that central point of Kelly's report in your section reviewing his evaluation on page 19 of your report?
I don't believe I quoted this, but I believe I said what his diagnosis was and that he was resting his opinion on the volitional prong, namely unable to conform his conduct. And I believe I discussed delusions. So yes, I think I covered this in my report.
Okay, one of the, I can take that back from you, Doctor. Now, you did not see him, but obviously there was abundance of information you could review from Mr. Loya, and you determined, as you told Mr. Glennie, that he was suffering from both borderline personality disorder, correct?
Yes.
And I think you said avoidant. Is that correct as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And did you use the criteria set forth in the DSM-5?
I did.
Let's start then with avoidant, and I think you may have said some of these. I showed my brother. Could you take a look at that for yourself, please?
Yes.
Is that the criteria that you talked about with the jury, sorry, Brad, that you utilized, again, coming from the DSM-5?
Yes, I believe so. I haven't memorized it, but I take your word for it. It looks like what it is.
Okay, and you indicate that that applies to Mr. Loya.
Yes.
Now, I think you used the word at some point, pervasive, is that the word?
Yes, it's right in the first sentence, a pervasive pattern.
And please tell us what that means.
That means it's really present in most aspects of a person's life. It's not episodic, it doesn't come and go, and it really touches every aspect of who they are.
Okay, and you said how many of these, please, apply to Mr. Loya?
4 is the diagnostic requirement.
And that's what the requirement is pursuant to that labeling of that book.
Yes.
And you don't really espouse to that labeling system, do you, Carter?
I'm not sure what you mean espouse to it.
You prefer to identify, what is it, symptoms? Isn't that fair?
Well, that is a list of, the DSM uses signs and symptoms to create these diagnostic categories, and that's what you use.
But it's not perfect for any particular individual, is it not?
Well, I can't say the DSM is perfect.
Right. And in fact, it gives cautionary, tell us about the cautionary, I think it's page 20 of the diagnostic manual. What does it say? How does it caution?
You're talking about with respect to forensic psychiatry? That there is an imperfect fit between diagnoses and legal categories. I haven't memorized that, but you may have it.
But in fact, that DSM manual is for the clinicians, is it not?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, it's not, perhaps, it wasn't set or completed for this atmosphere, it's for the people working in the field, wasn't it?
Yes, it's for making a psychiatric diagnosis. And it also should inform treatment.
Now, I showed you avoidant, and you also said borderline,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
And he meets that, again, what I told you, the criteria for borderline, correct?
Yes.
Now,
In the testing you showed me, the testing that you just showed me in those evaluations that you were referring to, that suggested borderline personality as well, but I couldn't have all the testing. So I'm not going to hang my hat on testing that I can't have.
okay, I think you just where I was going with that one. The testing did also suggest, right, that borderline personality could be present. Is that fair?
Yes. That's what I got from Dr. Holzen's quote of the testing.
Now, in one of the diagnostic criteria for the borderline personality disorder is a paranoid ideation, correct?
Transient, I believe, is the phrase.
Well, the word paranoid, that's the same term that Dr. Kelly used when he said Mr. Loya's actions on that evening were under the control of a functionally paranoid delusional system, isn't it?
That's mixing up about 4 or 5 disorders, what you just said.
Okay, so you're not adopting under the heading of the borderline personality disorder that a trait of it is a paranoid ideation?
Paranoid ideation is a marginal symptom of borderline personality disorder under stress, and it is not a delusional system. A delusional system is fixed. If a person's functioning were characterized by paranoid ideas, you would classify them as psychotic, and you would call it a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia. So psychosis is a symptom, paranoid ideation is a symptom, delusional disorder is a disease, and those are very different.
If a person, doctor, had the beliefs of being conspired against, cheated on, maliciously maligned, or obstructed in pursuit of goals, when that actually wasn't occurring in reality, isn't that an example of the paranoid ideation?
Say that again?
Again, if a person had the beliefs of being conspired against, cheated on, maligned, or obstructed in the pursuit of goals when it wasn't actually occurring in reality? Wouldn't that be the paranoid ideation?
If it wasn't true, if someone wasn't trying to harm them or maligning them, you mean if you thought you were being followed or harmed?
Well, I mean, is there examples in your voluminous review of Mr. Loya of him being maliciously maligned?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. Maliciously maligned.
All the
An
examples
instance, you mean?
all the examples you gave Mr. Glennie, was he being conspired against, Mr. Loya?
Conspired against?
Yeah, by people in the military or otherwise.
I don't believe so, but are you referring to an instance or a...
Any of the incidents you suggested, Doctor.
He was disciplined by the military.
Appropriately so, though, was he not?
When I read the records, they give evidence for the reasons they disciplined him.
And you talked about Adrian Loya receiving a page 7, right?
Yes.
And Lisa Trebnikova received a page 7. You were aware of that, weren't you?
That is not in my record, that she received a page 7.
You saw Dr. Kelly diagnosis of paranoid delusional system, is that right?
I don't remember that he said paranoid delusional system.
Okay, give us the definition, please, of the delusional system, if you would.
A delusional
Disorder, I'm
A
sorry.
delusional disorder is a disorder characterized by false, fixed belief that someone holds despite evidence to the contrary. They can be bizarre or non-bizarre, but they have to be false, fixed belief, and you cannot diagnose a delusional disorder when the mood symptoms extend for longer than the delusions. But the rest, there are a few more criteria in there that I haven't memorized.
But the delusional, you saw that suggested in Dr. Daniel's report as well as Dr. Kelly's, right?
I believe that Dr. Kelly said he was in the throes of a delusional system of some kind, and Dr. Dano diagnosed a formal delusional disorder.
You know that Dr. Dano spent better than 40 hours with Mr. Loya, right?
I believe he spent, yes, 43 hours with Mr. Loya.
The, please. If a person, I'm going back, I asked you, please, doctor, about the delusional disorder. If a person with a delusional disorder does not, they do not present obviously bizarre or odd behavior, that's fair to say, isn't it?
They don't have to present oddly or with bizarre behavior, correct?
And isn't it true that a common characteristic of individuals with delusional disorder is the apparent normality? Is that fair?
Yes, are you reading the DSM, from the DSM?
Well, parts, page 92, and you'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
I'll take what you say.
And besides the normality of their behavior and appearance when the delusion ideas are not being discussed or acted on. In other words, they can appear normal.
Yes, that's fair.
How many cases have you worked on with the diagnosis of Asperger's, doctor?
Probably 2.
Okay. In those 2, what was were you given?
A case as opposed to clinically.
Right, were you given an opinion about criminal responsibility?
Both of those were consulting cases.
Okay. Consult. Now, how many cases have you testified on as it relates to criminal responsibility?
I would have to estimate, and I could go back because I keep a list, but testified for criminal responsibility, I'm guessing 8, 10, outside, after my fellowship. During my fellowship, when I was employed at the Lindemann, the Lindemann was a forensic psychiatric hospital affiliated with Mass General, and then I testified very frequently, probably every other week, but that was on behalf of the institution
Other than that, we talked about the 8 to 10 times, mostly prosecution or defense?
You asked me whether I testified about criminal responsibility. I have performed many more criminal responsibility evaluations than that, but most of them don't result in testimony.
And with today, I believe you were asked by Mr. Glennie, how much you paid for your opinion today, for your opinion in this case?
$550 an hour.
Okay, do you know what the total is?
As of today, probably, and don't hold me to the dollar, about $37,000.
Okay, and did that include your report, that 36, or you said 37, I'm sorry.
Could be 38.
Did that include your report?
I believe yes.
Okay, your report is some 42 pages, right?
Yes.
And there's a rule of thumb in your business, it's about an hour a page, right?
That's not something I'm familiar with. An hour a page?
Yeah. You've never heard that?
You mean it takes someone an hour to write a page?
Or one may suggest as a rule of thumb that it's about an hour, it takes about an hour a page. You've never heard that expression?
No, but if you say so.
You remember testifying in Angela Vasquez case?
A long time ago.
Okay. So if I were to suggest to you at one point in time, you said as a rule of thumb, it takes about an hour a page?
It's possible, yeah.
Now, you talked about knowing right from wrong, right? When we talked about
Yes.
wrongs.
Yeah.
And again,
Appreciating wrongfulness, yeah.
appreciate wrongfulness. And of course, that's ultimately up to the jury to decide, right?
Yes.
Now, one can understand that what they're doing is wrong, correct? But also believe they're morally right. Is that fair?
Could you say that again?
Well, again, I knew it was some time ago, I think it was 2009, the Angela Vasquez. Pretty serious.
Yes, I remember the case well, yes.
Woman killing her children.
Yes.
And although you couldn't talk to her about the event, because she had no memory of it, right? She knew it was wrong to kill her children, but it was morally right because she was taking them to a better place. Wasn't that ultimately your conclusion?
You know, that case was a long time ago. I would have to review it. But Ms. Vasquez was found not criminally responsible, but her circumstances and diagnosis were completely different.
Okay. Major depression, right?
Yes. Major depression with psychotic features.
And you remember that she killed her children? Right?
I do, yes.
But she couldn't remember or tell you exactly how she killed them, right?
When we get to the specifics of, I would have to review my report.
If you recall, though, that she believed she was doing something morally right, she didn't want them to be abused like she was, does that refresh your recollection?
I'm not trying to be a pill here. The issue is, you're saying morally right, and I don't remember whether she felt morally justified or she was trying to prevent them from being abused by someone else. So you're suggesting that I don't want to mischaracterize a past case or a past motive. That case is, I don't remember the year of it, but it's not recent.
Let me get back, please, Doctor. I asked you a few moments ago about delusional disorder, or somebody suffering from it can appear quite normal or may not even be acting out at all, correct? Now, at least according to DSM-5, violent behavior can occur with delusional disorder, correct?
Yes.
Why is that?
In general, people can feel persecuted, they can feel fearful, they can strike out. There are all kinds of reasons why someone with a psychotic disorder could be violent.
Okay. And now, if Mr. Loya were operating under the delusion at the time of the incident, as Dr. Daniel and Dr. Kelly say, is it within the realm of your science that he might not have appreciated the wrongfulness of his behavior?
You're saying, well, I don't accept the notion that he is delusional or was delusional. Delusional people have false beliefs. They're psychotic. They have a break with reality. Delusion is classified as a psychotic disorder It is not a mood disorder. It's not a personality disorder.
Was his description of having been raped, that's reality-based, his perception of having been raped?
We have no independent evidence of what happened that night. I have no reason to think that he was misdescribing, so he described it in great detail. Throughout his writings, Mr. Loya sometimes described it as a rape, sometimes described it as a sexual assault, but he was very clear that he didn't believe that he was, as he said, I'm the only one who believes it was, and that he was not assaulted. I believe in the first page of his writings of Loya Wars, he said he was neither raped nor did he rape her, I believe. He could have said, I was neither sexually assaulted nor did I sexually assault her.
So he according to you, doctor, he accepted what occurred, but he continued to keep referring to it as rape, sexual assault, and in fact, you recall being called rape of the mind, right?
Yes, I believe he called it a rape of the mind.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything further of this witness?
Yes, just very briefly. You were asked a moment ago if he's received the page 7. Do you remember that question?
I do.
Is it important if you knew if she received the page 7 or if he knew she received the page 7?
I'm sorry?
Would it be important if you knew that Lisa had received the page 7 or that Mr. Loya knew she received the page 7?
I'm assuming that if Mr. Loya knew, he would have taken it into consideration, and he was enraged that he received one, and he was perceived as the villain. And I can't speculate, but he might have thought that he was treated more fairly if he had known.
And do you have an opinion as to a clinician spending 43 hours with the person and performing an evaluation for criminal responsibility?
Well, I can't say,
Does she have an opinion about the amount of time the clinician spends?
Yeah.
I'll allow it.
there's some latitude in how much time people spend with people. I can't say that what was necessary for him to formulate an opinion or not, but it's quite unusual to spend that long with a defendant, in my experience.
And you considered, having read Dr. Danow's report, having read Dr. Kelly's reports, all of the diagnoses that they make, correct?
Yes.
They're inconsistent, aren't they?
With each other?
Yes.
Yes.
And you considered those in forming your opinion, right?
The conclusions that you've read?
No, actually, I think my conclusion is for the most part, consistent with Dr. Holtz's.
Very good. Now, again, I think he used the term 43 hours, was Dr. Daniel, was that the number, 43, right?
Yes.
And Dr. Kelly was 9 hours, all with this fellow that first time you've seen him was today, right? Seen him in person?
Yes.
Okay, nothing further, Your Honor.
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you. You may step aside. Thank you.
Ian, I would present the tape at this point, but if you'd like to.
Yeah, I'm going to say a few things.
Good,
Why
thank
don't you wheel the thing in and let's get to work. Jurors, we've received testimony regarding a GoPro. The item itself is Exhibit 125A. Within that item, apparently there is some sort of a memory device that's been called a stick or something of that sort. That's Exhibit 125B. That device apparently holds the entirety of the recorded event, to the extent it was recorded. It contains, and the lawyers are in agreement as to this, it contains a great deal of blank screen. By that I mean darkness and other depictions that aren't terribly helpful, but would keep you in your chair for a very long time watching. Therefore, the lawyers have reduced them. They've produced 2 edited versions. One is longer than the other. The longer edited version has been marked as 125C. It's a disc. It is, as I understand it, identical to the information on the stick, except that it excludes the total darkness instances. From the basic source, there is a second edited version. That has been marked as 125D. We're going to show 125D to you now. It's approximately 12 minutes. B and C, for that matter as well, are much longer. You are certainly able to view the longer exhibit in your jury room. This is being shown to you at this point as a summary, if you will, of what's on 125D. It's not meant to preclude you from looking at the longer version. It's being presented as a summary. Is that a fair recitation, counsel?
Yes,
Fair.
Anything either counsel would have?
yes, just about the timestamp.
I'm sorry? Oh. You'll see a timestamp where there's a time running, and you'll see it jumps periodically. That's where the editing's at. You'll also see a date stamp, and we in America tend to date things numerically as month, day, year. The rest of the world doesn't agree with us. I know that might come as a shock to some of you, but by and large in international parlance, you get the day, the month, and the year, and that's what will appear on this screen. So you're going to be seeing 05, 02, and I forget what it is, 2015 or just 15? 2015. All right. Yeah, Walter, maybe you could close that curtain there behind that juror. Well, the juror will take care of it for us. Terrific. You can always tell when a jury's been with us for a while.
We get bossy.
Not bossy, helpful. Let's call it helpful, okay?
What's that? Go ahead, whenever you're ready, Mike.
Commonwealth rests. And with that, jurors, enjoy your lunch. Please be in your jury room ready to go at 2 o'clock. I'll bring you right down and put you to work. Thank you.
Juries, all rise, please.
The jury is out of the room. This is a public courtroom. All are welcome to attend. It is open to the public. The public's encouraged to attend. Out of respect to the hard work of the jurors, it would be most appreciated if people who are not using electronic gizmos for media functions, in other words, news gathering functions, but instead for their personal use, would not use them while the jury's in the room. It's disrespectful to the jurors to be holding your device and tinkering with it, or holding it in your lap, obviously tinkering with it. These folks are working very hard. Show them the respect they deserve. Thank you. Attorney Sagatelli.
Nothing.
All right, lunch and recess.
All rise, please.